Right, this is going to be another episode of Summoning Insight. And of course, as people who've watched this year will know, we are sponsored by the Freeze Pipe. And of course, Freeze Pipe has their classic bongs where you get them. They have the food safe glycerin chamber. You take it out, put it in the freezer section for an hour. It cools your smoke by up to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, according to the website. I've said 200, but don't worry, 200 is counted within 300. So either way, it's all good, isn't it? And of course, you can get 10% off with the code LFN at thefreezepipe.com. But here's the thing. When you do that, we're not just telling you about a product, but at the same time, we're not the sort of people, if you know us actually, who are telling you just because you support us, you don't have to buy a product you don't want. This is basically for people who smoke cannabis. Consider this product. Like if you want to actually get an awesome bong that means you don't have annoying, irritating smoke, you just have a nicer experience. This is the way to do it. And save 10% while doing it with the code LFN at thefreezepipe.com. We're not asking you, like Henry V at Agincourt, to go once more unto the breach, dear friends, and battle the French. You know, insert a lot of jokes there, but I won't. We're not asking you to ride to almost certain death and what for a hobbit against the forces of Sauron at Mordor. That seems unreasonable. I'm not even telling you to do the Death Star run and shoot a little missile down a ventilation shaft that causes a space station to explode. All I'm telling you is, if you support us and you like weed, check out this bong, dab, oil rig, bubbler at thefreezepipe.com with the code LFN for 10% off. That's it. That's all I'm asking.
And don't be confused by their twin product. If you were watching the Fnatic LEC games this last weekend, the Nightshare pipe, which is different than the Freeze Pipe, guys. So we're sponsored by the Freeze Pipe only, okay? Yes. And also, we have a new Esports Cringe episode, also sponsored by the Freeze Pipe, coming out on Friday for you. We already recorded it last week. Thank you for your video submissions. We'll keep doing those. We love doing them. So shout out to the Freeze Pipe.
Indeed. By the way, should we actually just start there? Because there's so many things we could actually talk about like this. Like obviously there's that whole thing where they're going to redo the format for next year in LEC. You can do, like, there's a million angles we can go out of this. Let's start with that, actually. Let's just talk about that, because they haven't said what it's going to be yet. But I actually find this whole thing annoying. I'm probably going to do a video on my solo channel. Like, if people saw recently when I did that side select show with Richard's Wrath and Foxtrot, I did a little rant on it about this. But I actually feel like everyone's so far off the pace on this one, mate. Right, there's two things I would bring up here. Like I say, I'll probably do a whole video on this. I'll make it like brief points, and then you can get your thoughts on it. Basically, right, when people complain about the LEC format this year, there are two elements, as far as I can tell, that they're actually mad about. Because one thing I'm quite good at is like resolve down to what the issue is, not like what people are saying the issue is. And the problem I can as far as I can tell it, what people want done doesn't change it. So people's assumption goes at this, Monty, because the season finals felt weird and sort of tacked on at the end, despite the fact that in theory should be the main event of like European League of Legends, because it felt weird and tacked on, and simultaneously was operating as the world's qualification, which, as I've pointed out on this show, sort of scuffed the incentives. Because you notice even the casters made this mistake, Monty. Instead of saying when Fnatic wins all those 5-game series, and Fnatic's still in a chance to win the season finals, they would be saying, and they've just got the third seed. Like, what are you talking about? We're in the middle of fucking, he hasn't won the Super Bowl yet. Like, so they would already, I get that felt weird and jarring, right? It was sort of like, what's going on? Is it the qualifier? Is it? But then the other thing is, people also hate that G2 won all these splits. And let's be real, like if they'd have beaten Mad Lions in spring, they probably would have won that one too. They would have won the 3 mini splits and then the season finals. And so people feel like, Monty, this is the format that's the problem. But my issue is this. I can make it very quick. One, in terms of the actual format, I think the solution is simple for me. You just make it like the other regions, Monty. We already know the answer from LPL and LCK. You make the season finals just about winning the championship and maybe like winner gets first seed. And then you do a regional for the rest, don't you? Because that way, just like the LCK and LPL does, you separate it out and you never are watching the LPL like, whoa, oh, cool. Now that like top esports has been beaten by LNG, now they've got a world. You're not doing that. You're looking like, can LNG win LPLs? What you ask yourself. Then you worry about if they're going to worlds, what seed. So that's one thing already. You don't even have to change the split format. But then the other thing to me is this. I think this is a really unfair year to use this as the example, Monty, the idea that the format produced G2 dominating. Like, why are we all fucking around pretending like all the top teams didn't int the GM in? What are we talking? Look at it, Monty. The two teams by the end who competed with fucking G2 was XL and Fnatic, who had to like radically change their rosters over the year. and started with very uncompetitive rosters. Then you go and look, Vitality was a super team that failed and ruined all that talent. Then you've also got fucking Mad Lions, who actually, by the way, was never even supposed to be a contender. They were supposed to be like 4th or 5th best team. If you go look at the beginning of the year, everyone had them like 4th, 5th, or 6th in their roster things. Maybe some like very optimistic person had them 3rd. I don't know anyone who had them top 2. So you look at the teams out there. Koi were the champions last year. Vitality made a super team. XL was supposed to have a super team. Fnatic's supposed to always be decent at least. You know what I mean? Like, you run down the list, like, this isn't anything to do with G2 or the format. Like, as far as I can tell, the GMs just did a really bad job in the offseason, and they entered the first couple of splits, and then by the end, it meant that the only teams that could compete were teams that, like this is why the XL Fnatic one sucked, because those are, like, newer rosters. Like, why should they beat G2 in their first outing in a playoff or first beat? Like, the G2 team's been there the whole year. They're all powered up. So, to me, I actually think, like, look, we can certainly get into things you don't like about this format, and maybe they don't want a 3-split format, but I actually think that's sort of, like, unconnected to what people's issue is. Like I say, for me, the real thing you blurred is the messaging around what a Worlds qualifier is and what's the domestic championship. Because obviously, if you're going to call it season finals, this should be the main thing we're all playing for. It shouldn't be some like side shit. And then the other thing to me, like I say, is I actually think there's a world where if those teams just did a better job with the squads, we'd have had a very competitive year. In fact, I'd even say this format could have been amazing. Imagine if all those teams I listed were actually really competitive. You had like 5 banger teams going through those little split things. That would have made amazing playoff runs and run backs and upper and lower finals. We just never got it because there was also only one good team by the end.
Well, there's a few things I want to respond to there. I've said it before, but I think it's very difficult to GM in League of Legends because you are signing a team before you even know the results of the major changes during the offseason.
Yeah.
And so for me, the better indicator of GMing is the changes you make during the season to your roster.
Okay.
And so I would argue that actually having more splits in Europe it increased the number of times you could make roster changes. So even though we did see with Excel, for example, a very hyped roster that didn't have synergy and performed poorly, they iterated over time into a place where they were actually much more competitive. So if we want competitive teams, I think it's better to have more splits and more breaks, just like you see in Counter-Strike, where there's more opportunities to make roster changes if you feel that things are not going well, and you can be a little bit more aggressive on that front. And at the very least, I would say, even if you fail in your roster changes, at least fans are excited to see the new team again. You know what I mean? So it creates hype regardless of whether you're going to be successful or not, because there are going to be people who are interested in discussing the roster change and seeing the effects of the roster change split to split. I also think that as what's his name? Max Schmidt, he, as usual with Riot, is just instantly promoted upwards. So he's not the LEC commissioner anymore. He's above the LEC commissioner. He said during the clip that was on the LEC broadcast that the feedback was mostly good, which I think is true. Like, it's not the 3-split system is not what people were complaining about. People were complaining about the fact that the World's qualification system in Europe was so scuffed, the breaks in between, the end of summer and season finals, whether we even really needed a season finals or whether we could have just had a more robust summer playoffs. Because remember, there's nothing that says that the playoff system has to be the same for winter, spring, and summer. You could have winter and spring be the same and do something a little bit more robust for the summer split that leads into the first seed qualifying for Worlds, or just have the regionals built into that somehow. There's certainly a way you can accomplish both things at the same time, but it did seem to just kind of drag on and on and on. And the other complaint, obviously, was that there weren't arena events for this year. I've said before, I understand why that decision was made. They had a fixed budget, and they decided to allocate that budget to more games in this format rather than going to stadiums. I think with the success of this format, that we'll get both this format and stadium events, or at least out of studio events for winter and spring next year. So I think that problem will solve itself naturally, given that we've seen the success and it justifies, in my mind,
that mad
probably
detail?
additional budget.
I think it was on Dom's Twitter or something. It was that mad piece of trivia where, like, something mad, Monty, like, obviously aside from Worlds, like, this, like, finals was like the first time Kazi had played in like a stadium or something absurd, because obviously he came in like the COVID year, didn't he?
It makes sense, right?
That's ridiculous. Think how many times he's been in the finals, etc. What? He's a champion multiple times over. That's so scuffed, isn't it? Fuck.
Yeah, and especially this year, it was going to be necessary to get players a lot of stadium experience because this is the first year we've been able to do it. And if you want to send good teams to Worlds, you need to get those players stadium experience before they go to Korea to compete.
By the way,
right?
I'll just tell you something. I'll say it to you with this cheerful smile on my face because I've realized the other fucked up thing you do in esports is a little bit behind the scenes inside baseball is things that are really annoying to you become actually sort of funny when they're happening to people that you know, though, because then you just sort of get to see their annoyance. So, like, in the same ways, I hate it when people are being annoying to me, but when they're being annoying to Dom, it's sort of like, oh, let's see what he says to this. Like, I sort of enjoy it too. I'll just tell you, just to see if it annoys you. What about this, Monty? I was told straight-faced by fans, so you know, the real experts. They told me, Monty, that the reason why we need to go from a three-split system back to a two-split system is because we all know that the less times teams meet, the more hype it is.
Oh.
They're still telling me that. Someone who comes from fucking the open circuit at Counter-Strike. They're telling me that still in 2023. Bro, these guys are never going to look. We can't ever beat the people who have that mentality. I don't get it as well, because actually, surely the history of League, guys, proves that isn't true. In fact, actually, I'll tell you the thing that sucks the most is when you finally get to like amazing world-class teams meet at Worlds, and then it's like a fucking nothing burger series. It's like, this sucks actually. Like, you know what I mean? Like all the times you've hyped yourself the whole year. Because I actually think that is generally the way that goes is like when you meet once, who the fuck knows? It's way better like any sport when you met a bunch of times and you got that like track record and the game within a game and you beat me once, so now I have to like, am I going to revolutionize my gameplay? Do I come with the same approach? Like, I think that's where the meat is for me. So I have the opposite take to most fans for some reason.
I mean, after watching, now that we're done with domestic competition, I think I can definitively say, Thorin, that I really didn't want to watch more KT versus Gen.G. I didn't want to watch more JDG versus LNG. You know, I didn't want to watch any more of these matchups this year at all. I totally got my fill off of the matches we saw, despite the fact that we didn't even get to see a best of 5 between Gen.G and KT. Yeah. So I don't know, man. That's like, it's pretty outrageous.
It's also just weird taking it, because to me, it's like everyone who does that doesn't ever seem to actually be basing it off, like, it's not like they're saying like last year that happened and I was hyped. It's always some weird hypothetical where that's like the ideal scenario you'd have. Because the reason I bring it up is I actually do think Riot on some degree believe that still. I think that's still like one of their philosophies, in my opinion.
I mean, it's even more egregious, though, in China and Korea, where you only get 1 or 2 best of 3 matchups between 2 of the top teams every split. You only get 1 in LPL, which is crazy.
By the way, that was the obvious thing as well. There's another antidote, right? Even if they have played, they're only BO3s. A BO5 is fundamentally different to a BO3. It's not just the 2 extra possible games, is it? Like, the way you draft's different, the way you play in the first games. Like, I actually always thought the Asian regions just prove what I'm saying is correct. Like, you actually want a bunch of games between them. I mean, mate, like, as you said, like, KT Gen.G was probably the best matchup of the year so far. Like, every time it was a banger.
And we never got to see the best of 5 in the summer playoffs.
They play at Worlds now as a result. Like, we'll see them in the semis or something.
Yeah, it's wild that we have to hope that is a Worlds matchup, though.
It is,
what the fuck is that? But yeah, I mean, look, I think that the LEC format overall was a big improvement for me. I really enjoyed watching this much more than double round robin best of 1. I enjoyed the fact that the teams were able to be more aggressive in their roster moves. So we got to see new iterations of rosters and we got to see new players coming into this league. We wouldn't have gotten the rebound of XL and Fnatic had it not been probably for this 3-split system where XL was just objectively garbage for 2 of them and then managed to turn it around. It was a great story. So I think the more opportunities you give teams to get better and to showcase good GMing, the better quality your league is going to be. And I think the problems that LEC had are obvious and they are fixable. I think they're extremely fixable. In fact, I think LEC will like to fix them because it's going to mean fewer broadcast days, which means they are going to save money or at least put that money into doing more live events again. So this all seems like it's on a very good trajectory, in my opinion.
Also,
I don't really see any.
I'll just throw this out there because obviously I don't do by the numbers of rich and loose anymore. So there's no petty grievances section in which I can air my petty grievances and score points against people who. I mean, here's the thing. I actually do them a favor. I don't even call my enemies Monty now. Most of these are just people who themselves position themselves as my enemies. Like, I have very few actual enemies. You're not really an enemy of mine. Most of you wouldn't even be written in the script that way. You're just you're like just one of those random ambush fights in like Final Fantasy, but I'm already on level 700, so I could dust you off easily before I go fight the, fucking Sephiroth or whoever the fuck it is. So all I'll say is this. I saw, like you say, good old bald head Max the Max popped up, who has a shit 90s fucking name as well, like some MTV level name. But he popped up and said his comment about like the changing the format, right? If people don't know, about 2 years ago or whatever it was, he was the one who did that tweet where it was like saying that Thorin is like a net negative to esports or something, which is you're already begging belief. I've done thousands of videos. Like, you remember, I've never actually committed a single crime my entire time in esports. Like, dude, people make out like I have like a fucking killing fields full of bodies or something. Like, I've done nothing but just do awesome fucking content and a few tweets he didn't like, right? I'll spin it the other way. Logically, I can't know what this guy did at Riot, Monty, but I know his job and I know what he oversaw. And so I can apply the leaner principle, which is whatever you oversaw, you are responsible for, whether it's your fault or not. So all I'll say is this: was Max the Max a positive or a negative for European League of Legends? Because all I'm going to say is, under his regime, we had some of the worst qualification systems, in my opinion, ever in League of Legends. Because he had those 2 years, Monty, where Rogue and Mad Lions qualified by like not even winning a best of 5 or something mental. Do you remember that? Or they won like one whack one and then they went to Worlds and just shit the bed. So essentially, he allowed fucking, no joke, round of robin BO1s to qualify motherfuckers to Worlds. Like, that's by definition a net negative. Like, you've actually ruined the scene there. And also, the other thing I would say on that whole topic is, the thing that's so underwhelming about League of Legends, Monty, I made this joke years ago because it's an old Christopher Hitchens line, right? There was a Christopher Hitchens line he used to have where he said the problem with the United States of America is it always does the right thing at the very end. And his joke was they do everything wrong and then just by the process of elimination eventually just arrive whatever the thing you should do. I've always felt like it's that with like Riot and League. It's like, bro, it's 2023, season 13, and what we've almost figured out how to do like qualification for Worlds. Like, how many chances do you need? Over 13? Like, well, there'd be 11 in this case, but mate, how have we not figured it out yet? This is years ago.
I mean, the other thing too is like, was he part of the Neon deal that got scrapped?
He was there at the time, so you'd figure he'd have to be on some level, right?
Right. And also, here we go. Here's a fun one. They are raising the LEC minimum age to play to 18. Talk about this. Because this implies that they are either going to get alcohol or betting sponsors in Europe. And now we have to ask
crypto or some shit like that,
or crypto. Now we have to ask Mr. Max the X, what the net negatives to esports are. Now, I don't have a problem with alcohol or betting, but a lot of people have decided to virtue signal on the internet and discuss these things. And by the way, him saying that you were a net negative to esports when you are the only reason we have a significant portion of the history of esports, and your greatest crime is, wait for it, writing tweets.
Bloody tweets again. It's like that joke that Richard used to have in his Twitter where it said, Gamergate was my Vietnam. Like, that is the level some of these fuckers are on, mate. They act like Twitter's like, fucking like some war zone. I know. Like, by the way, there's another thing as well. Bear in mind, Riot already did this at the beginning of LCS. People might remember famously Reckless couldn't play in season 3, but the first season of ULCS, Reckless had to play in the challenger scene, even though he was already on Fnatic because he was only 16 at the time. Right. The rule was you had to be 17. So what they've done now is apparently they're going to raise the rule by one more year. It's going to be 18. Well, because I did an article back then, and I'm the esports historian, I actually did an article back then saying why it was a bad idea to raise it to 17, because the points I made was, the insanely impressive and long history of 15-year-old and 16-year-old world champions in fucking esports, bro. Like, what are we doing here? So, like, if people don't know, we're going to raise the rule now to 18, Monty, right? So you remember that season that Reckless couldn't play, season 3. So in the final of the season 3 world championship, you had T1 against Royal Never Give Up, didn't you? So that's Faker won Worlds, age 17, won Worlds. He wouldn't even be allowed to qualify to go to Worlds in the new system. Then how about this? Opposite, on the other side of the server, you had Uzi I, who was 16, coming runner-up. Well, he would be 2 years off being allowed to qualify. Then how about the year before, season 2? You had that team Invictus Gaming Go. I think Zitai was like 15 years old when he qualified for that tournament. Keep going. Go back in esports history. Flash was like 15 when he made the semi-final of a fucking OSL. You had Cooler and Cypher and Havoc. These people were winning championships when they're 15, 16 years old. It's actually a very long history. And by the way, the dumbest part about it is, this is LEC. Here's one thing I am sick of. Can we have some sort of, if we're going to have world championship for competitive integrity, we all have to have the same fucking rules. How can he be like 17 in his region and then qualify the worlds, turn 18 and play worlds? But I can't play at all because the rules are different in my region. I feel like you're just going to scoff the competitive integrity, mate. Because Asia's going to have a million 16-year-olds forever, and we're just going to have to be 18 to play day one as a rookie.
I mean, obviously, China also has a history of
the fucking birth certificate and all that. Yeah, of course.
You know, there have been a lot of questions.
Unfortunately, in the West, no one's even going to consider doing that. No one from the European Union is going to like fake the birth certificate, are they? Like,
well, I don't think you need government assistance with that one, right? And I don't think the governments of Europe are going to comply or have an incentive to do that. But yeah, there has been lots of suspicion for many years that China, especially in the Olympics, is sending people who are not old enough to compete in the Olympics. And like, I think that is potentially true, or could be true, of League of Legends as well, given the popularity of the game in China. Obviously that's just speculation. We can't know that, but you know, it wouldn't surprise me if some of these players were not 17 and indeed have not been 17 at the time that some of these tournaments have been sent out. So in any case,
say, though, the most logical thing here, because you notice they didn't even attempt to give some, there's not even any hint of like, it's for some age. Like you say, Monty, it's almost certainly just so you can have the people sponsored by something that you'd have to be 18 to use. And so having the player be 18 sort of like solves any ethical problem, right? That's a fair assumption to make, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that this is just a product of esports winter, if I'm being honest.
Right.
Like, and this is what is so frustrating about Riot's morals, is that as soon as they get in trouble, and don't get me wrong, you know, with the teams in the state they are, and I agree with this, by the way, I agree that the teams and the leagues should be taking betting and alcohol sponsorships. I don't have a problem with people enjoying those things responsibly, right? And so, but they have made such a big grandstand over the years of that these things for the last 10 years have not been allowed for teams or leagues to have these sponsorships, that we just have to ask ourselves the question, what has fundamentally changed in this environment? Like, why is it suddenly okay now when it wasn't okay before? In my opinion, it always should have been okay to have these kind of sponsors. And at least in LCS, I think you could make an argument that obviously betting was not legal in many American states, but now that has completely changed. And I mean, obviously the PR that they're going to message is like, this has become more socially acceptable in the United States over those years. But the real answer is that they had a moral objection to these things. And now that they don't have money, their morals have changed. And that's the only way to read this, which is, by the way, Riot in a complete nutshell, and never ever be surprised by this hypocritical bullshit behavior from them. Now, I will be happy if all of this happens, because I don't want to see the teams, as we've discussed here on the Four Horsemen, who have been the most fucked by everything that have been going on, go under. And unfortunately, right now, there are very few revenue streams that are available for teams to take, partially because the teams and the leagues have burned all the other sponsors, so they need some fresh blood so they can fuck those up too, if I'm being honest, because they will fuck them up. But also because we've seen just this unveiling of betting in America. Obviously, if you're not American, you may not know, but like the NFL is now, you know, tons of betting advertisements, especially as the new season has just begun.
Lots of the podcasts I listen to with like NFL and NBA ones that have players, they're all sponsored by betting and fantasy stuff now, all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, which again, no problem. Totally fine, but they have to find other ways to bankroll these things. And betting, there are a lot of websites, traditional sports betting websites, that already offer esports books. And they just haven't been actively promoting them, partially because they don't have a venue to actively promote them outside of Counter-Strike, because betting has been restricted both by Riot and by Activision Blizzard and by Ubisoft. So basically that covers almost all the main esports outside of Valve's esports in CSGO and Dota. So you really have to think like this is going to unlock potentially a lot of money, and it would not be shocking to me at all to see both LCS and LEC open up to betting next year, because they need the money. They need it desperately, and they will just throw everything they've ever said in the trash can in order to achieve this result. And at the end of the day, it's going to be the same bullshit they pulled with FTX and crypto, which is that nobody can have crypto until Riot gets their beak wet first. And then all of a sudden it's okay for everyone else to have crypto. So, as long as they get the cash first, that makes it ethically okay for Riot to do these things. But it'll come. I mean, it has to. It's the only logical reason you would be raising the age, because you point out a lot of good reasons not to raise the age, Thorin. In fact, it actively hurts players, because if a player can't play at the top level of competition, they are not going to be paid what they should be paid for their skill level. So, they have to spend more years in amateur systems getting underpaid when they could just graduate to the top league and get a fat paycheck immediately.
Yeah. I mean, the joke is essentially you just do the same Reckless thing again. You just mean that some tier 2 team now gets to have, except in this case, they're not doing it to the Asian regions, but the equivalent of like a Caps or Reckless, they're just going to be stuck in some ERL for an extra year. By the way, you can even argue for the owners, that's better in it if you're more cynical. It's like college in America. You just get to have some talent stuck in your system for cheaper and get to benefit from all their fucking excellence, don't you?
I mean, I hate the NCAA for that reason.
This is one thing that does annoy me. It's going to be a minor thing to other people because you don't have to deal with it. But one thing I am sick of is how feckless esports fans are. So the same fan who just judges everyone, they'll judge like me and you for a sponsor or Richard for something. But then the second Riot changes so they have the same sponsor, or like ESL gets bought by the Saudis, by their own logic, since they've complained about this ethical problem, they then should never be able to watch the broadcast anymore. But magically they're able to absolve themselves, watch the broadcast, and suddenly it's fine. So even though like me and you have to have like some fucking struggle session, Salem witch trial over whether we can ever earn one fucking red cent, if the same company or an even worse one sponsors Riot, you all just tune into the broadcast and let them make all the money in the fucking world. Like, this is the reason why people don't give a fuck about fans, guys, because you just seem like you're just fucking fools. You just follow whatever Pied Piper, Riot, and ESL tell you is good.
I mean, that's because, as we know, Riot and ESL are the ethical arbiters of esports. So as soon as they do something, it's acceptable to do it. Now, we have to ignore the fact that one of them is owned by the Saudi government and that the other one has had way, way bigger scandals to the degree they had to pay off every woman who ever worked for them for workplace harassment and discrimination. But no, Ginger Man make tweet, therefore he is wrong.
Also mental, isn't it? How like me and Richard on Twitter, you'd think we actually were like Thanos getting all the Infinity Stones together. People, you got to stop them. It's just fucking send tweet. And the tweet, by the way, is just like, the player you like is overrated. And then they're like, I can't take it, man. It's so, the sad thing is, you could actually make some like shit comedy movie about how whack our careers were. I don't know. It's just like such a mountain of a molehill over everything in it. I know, it's the most minor shit of all time. It's like I even had this epiphany years back that like once idiots talk enough trash, you almost take what they're saying on board though, even when you dismiss it and give it like charity it doesn't deserve. Because I realized, when people do that thing of like, oh, and this, you're so mean, and then you watch back any show once, you pick out any show we've ever done and just go on the VOD, and on the timeline when you go through and you see the thumbnail that pops up, right? It'll show you obviously like as we're going through the timeline, all the different points. It's just people having a good time, mate. If you ever go and watch one of these VODs, it's just people laughing, talking, having a good time, fun, joviality, frivolity, skits. But then you listen to the way they describe it, and you would actually think it's like fucking one of Hitler's speeches in like 1938. Like it's nothing like that. It's so they overblow everything so much, mate. It's ridiculous.
Too funny.
Should we talk about LEC finals?
Sure, let's do it.
Because here's the sad thing. I know everyone got hyped and everyone wants to believe that like, oh, Fnatic really could have done it. It's like, yeah, but the problem is that final reminded me of all the other series Fnatic played where it's like, they're in kit. These guys can't do 3 good games in a row. It isn't in their fucking DNA. Like, it's in their DNA. They must have one game. They just meg it in or fuck up completely after 10 minutes. So like the real sad thing to me is I still actually believe it would have been better if Mad Lions has gone there. I actually think Mad Lions was the team that had a chance to do something. So fair play that Fnatic got through another insane 3-2 series. By the way, there's one thing we should probably address first of all. Everyone else is so over this, Monty. They don't have a problem with that Wonder thing. I do. Because you know what, Monty? the way Wonder actually played by the end, by the time he was in the final, like, I don't know that Oscarinen would have done that. Remember, Oscarinen's a rookie. Bro, he only came into the lineup, like, what, split in half ago or something? Like, we're just taking for granted he would have done everything Wonder did or better. I don't know that that's the case. I actually think, like I say, aside from maybe what the first 2 games he played all together when he came back, Wonder's looked pretty good, mate. His levels got better and better and better. And by the end, he actually did become the kind of factor that he should be. Like, he can just win you a game himself. He can give you a draft edge. Like, I think that's one thing I have a problem with. Is like this isn't even Fnatic. This isn't even their real lineup, guys. Why would we pretend like it is?
I mean, I think we saw at least the floor of Wonder within this series, which obviously we expected to be very high. Now, the fact of the matter is that he literally was on like Renekton Ornn duty for the entirety of his time with
Understandably,
yeah. So, and I don't blame that as a concept. So basically, he is weak side. That's it. That's what Renekton and I mean, Renekton can strong side too, but that's not the way they were playing, right? And the thing about Renekton is that he weak sides and gets advantages and causes pressure on that side of the map. And Ornn obviously weak side survives and then powers up into the late game in order to give you more carry potential. It also means that he didn't have to practice very many champions, and he didn't have to practice really a lot of coordination in the early game with his teammates. So I think from the coaching side, this was a very clever way to integrate him into the roster when he hadn't been an active pro player. You just basically say, look, dude, you're going to be on an island. We're going to play a couple champions with you. This is just how it's going to be. He as a player, it's a knowledge of who he is as a player. He as a player is a very good weak side player. He's a very stable player who is going to have good map awareness and be able to contribute with teleport in team fights later on in the game. Like you can trust his veteran sensibilities later on and for him to team fight effectively. So I think it was good. Do I think that it's impossible to know how Oscarinen would have done, especially because, as you point out, he's a rookie, and this would have been his first stadium experience. I mean, this is Wonder's 1 millionth rodeo in a stadium.
That's one MSI, for fuck's sake. I know.
Yeah. So, you know what you're getting. And, I mean, I still think it's egregious. There was another thread I saw today that popped up on Reddit that I had the misfortune of opening and reading a few comments about how, how was Wonder allowed to be on this roster? And that's still the question that nobody has addressed, including the
yeah.
So how come Max the X or the new LEC commissioner don't say anything about this substitution, which was made after roster lock occurred? It's completely ridiculous. Guys.
By the way, the most conspicuous thing, Monty, is that they can't just give a simple answer. Remember, if this is all above board, you just tell us I'm doing it for reason X, for this reason Y, and in the future, here's the precedent. Problem solved.
And here's the issue, again, is that there was no announcement about this whatsoever. At least there was an announcement for the Danny substitution that happened. But
even then, though, I believe the announcement was still on Reddit, though, Monty. That's the other thing. The other thing that Riot does in the modern days, none of this stuff goes in the archive. It doesn't go on LOL esports. Like, this is happening for that's why it actually looks sus. It almost looks like they think they're sneaking it through the line, like Riot themselves. Like, what?
And to all those people saying like, oh, well, it's not, here's the common argument, which is that Fnatic has an academy team, but LEC teams are not forced to have an academy team. Therefore, Fnatic shouldn't be forced to field an academy player. True, 100%, 100% true. But here's the thing, guys. All teams are forced to have substitute players.
There you go.
You use the substitute player that is on your roster. That is what you do.
This just goes back to what we said on the Danny one, which is just make every team have to have a declared sub for each position. Problem solved.
Yeah.
Problem solved. Well, it won't be problem solved because you have to use that player, but in theory it'd be problem solved. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to use that player, but that's the fair thing to do.
It is.
And that also, by the way, rewards teams who want to spend the money to have an academy roster. Yes. It rewards them. It provides a very material benefit. Not that, you can't just go out and sign some Wonder because he's available or switch out Danny for an AD carry who's actually better in the meta that you're playing in. I mean, that whole premise was ridiculous, and it is a breach of competitive integrity. And the reason why, I can just tell you, the reason why Riot does these things is because in the Danny case, they didn't want EG to show up to a stadium event, which was the lower bracket final that EG was in, and play an uncompetitive match when that was the event, it was an entire day, the Saturday, that they had sold tickets for. That is why, because they didn't want to have this, potentially bad matchup when they had sold tickets. And guess what, guys? It's the same shit here. They don't want Fnatic to perform badly with their fan base and bomb out of this tournament because they were forced to use the substitute that they had listed on their roster. So this is all very cynical. And by the way, guys, I'll tell you this. Behind the scenes in LCS, now I don't know about LEC this time, when the Danny substitution occurred, teams were pissed. They were pissed because this was really unfair.
Extra dirty as well, as you know, is because there was the whole mental health ambience around it. No one wanted to wade into that and be the bad guy.
They didn't want to say anything.
Yeah, it was just the logic was it's just bad PR. Like you're not going to win, and you're just going to look like a bad guy, basically, right?
Yes, the team said the people, teams told me we are very angry about this, but we can't make this a public issue because we will look like the bad guys.
Yes.
Saying that, mental health isn't important, which obviously is a massive buzzword on the internet that people love to get angry about these days. So they just decided to let it be. And at the end of the day, EG lost, and it wasn't as big of a deal, but it was pretty shitty for the teams that were competing.
Oh, absolutely.
And now in retrospect, it looks really bad that they didn't say anything, because had they said something at the time, perhaps we would have had some of these rules changed.
I mean, I'll even go one further. Like, in the end, it wasn't like, you could maybe argue, maybe Mad Lions might think, hey, I'd rather just Oscar and guy played and we'd have the real team. Aside from that one, because you did win that series, the other reason why people aren't realizing what a big deal this is, Monty, is what if this wasn't like the G2 that they're playing now? What if this actually was just a normal LEC team? And there's a world where Wonder could have won this fucking title, mate, as a potentially ineligible player, like you're saying. Like, what the fuck would that be? Like, the joke is, by the final, wasn't he the best player in Fnatic pretty much? Like, he was pretty good in the final. Like, if they were against a lesser team, they could have won that shit. That could have just been a championship. Yeah, and at the end, we're all just going to ignore that. Is he even eligible to win the championship? As he's lifting the trophy. What? That can't be it, Riot. Can't have that.
Well, and I'm not going to make the argument that Fnatic broke Oscar Nin's hand or anything like that. Of course not. But we don't have the story on that. And Dom has repeatedly said that whatever story that is completely ridiculous. So, if it was something that Oscar Nin did stupidly to himself, that's just an injury.
And why do you get benefit if you're Fnatic?
Why do you get benefit if you're Fnatic? If your player is doing something dumb, that becomes an internal matter for you to solve as part of Fnatic. And as I've said before, injuries happen in sports. Injuries happen. Did Faker get to sign some crazy... Did T1 sign some crazy free agent to replace Faker? No, they fucking took Poby off their academy roster and put him in and lost a bunch of games with him because Faker was injured, and that was their reserve player. Okay, so why do all these different leagues have different substitution rules? It's nutty. You have substitutes or you don't.
That would be like if when Faker was injured, that T1 was able to just have fucking Doinby fly. I've even given a sick example here. Fly in and be the only other human ever who could maybe do Faker's style. And then they're even better, Monty, and make the final off it. The Jokers didn't make the final anyway, but that would be mad egregious. The fuck. He's just sitting out there.
That's a great example. These things don't happen, right? And I don't understand. I mean, I do understand. The reason is viewership and people attending these events. But it's very cynical in that case. And they have chosen, and this is all you need to know about Riot, they have chosen this path over competitive integrity. That is what they have done. And it is blatantly obvious.
When everyone does that snark thing they all do on the internet, where, famously, if anyone ever makes $1 million, Monty, all those moron fans who themselves spend $300 of the, 400 they make in a month on a skin in the game, suddenly they become financial experts on Monty and they go, $1 million, he could be set for life if he invests that, right? And they act like they'd be all smart and do it like that, right? When they talk about this analogy like that, they're missing that, that's exactly what we're referring to now. There is a world in which you might not think this is plausible, but absolutely there are people who, if the stakes get big enough, I can tell you from sports, there are people who would break someone's leg if it meant you could get a better player and win the championship. Or the other one, here's another one I think's mad. You're all thinking, but they all make $20,000 a month. If I was doing that, I'd sit and be really careful. You wouldn't, because if you're a young idiot, you do what they do. But I do think, as a quick aside, one thing that is mental to me, Monty, is the amount of young stars in esports and people whose job is esports that I've seen who take no consideration into the idea their hands are their livelihood. I think it's crazy, mate. shit. Like, the worst is easily my native game of Counter-Strike. This is not a joke. I once went to an after, I think Richard might have told this story on his stream before. I once went to an after party in Counter-Strike where the actual organizer of the after party, the TO Monty, arranged for one of those boxing machines to be there where you punch it as hard as possible and it goes up to me. And I was watching all the greatest Counter-Strike players in the world go up with their dominant hand and punch a machine while drunk as hard as possible. And I remember just looking around like, I can't be the only one seeing this. Like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't think like night before, like a big fucking orchestra, symphonic orchestra players, they're all punching a fucking machine like that. Come on, everyone. Oh, come on, you fucking pussy.
It's also,
come on.
it's also, as I've said,
so
in violation of their contracts.
It probably is, yeah.
There are clauses in these contracts that say things like, you can't skateboard, you cannot ski, you can't skydive, which, by the way, is hilarious because that's 100% in the CLG players' contracts that Riot took skydiving. You can't skydive. That's in the yeah, because you want to protect your players' assets. But meanwhile, Poom and Dokla are off going skydiving with Dash as part of content. When I saw that, I was like, surely that is a contract violation. Oh, it's okay though. If Riot does it, it's okay. If those players actually, broke something on landing that caused them not to be able to play the game of League of Legends anymore, yeah, it's fine because we did it for the content. So yeah, I think that whole thing is just completely absurd. And yeah, I mean, would Riot have allowed illegal substitutions in that instance because the content that they were making was the cause of an injury for a player? But these players are not allowed to do these things for that exact reason. And it totally makes sense why this would not be allowed, right? You don't want the player that you're paying a significant amount of money for to suffer an injury through an unforced error. But it is wild to hear that they had this punching machine at a drinking party for
metal in it at all.
It's so crazy.
Steve Smart's in it.
I wish we had a recording of that just to watch pro players try and punch something. It would be really funny. But yeah, I mean, this is all to say, like, we can talk about the LEC final some more because it was, at the end of the day, this, I think, was a predictable matchup. Fnatic had kind of showed their hand over the 10 games they had played previously. I think G2 had a very good read. I was laughing that some predictions were 3-0 because there's no universe in which this is a 3-0 because here's what happens, guys. There are only two scenarios with G2. One of which is they have a slow start and they lose a long grind out game and then turn it on for the rest of the series. The other option is they go up 2-0, they troll one game, may get close to winning it but lose, and then they just turn on the Jets and win the fourth game of the series. They happy game like a motherfucker. They're not
they must have
a
done
clean
that
team.
5 series in the last 2 months alone. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Like, anybody who thought they were going to 3-0 just doesn't know G2. And it doesn't matter that they're in a final. The happy gaming will commence, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, we start to see, here comes the Yone in the third game of the series. Here comes the potential inting in bot lane and feeding of Noah, like, completely ridiculous. And then guess what? Next game, it's not even close. It is a complete stomp. Not from the start. I mean, mistakes were made with the level 1 and flashes being blown, but they turned it on after that. They won their really strong 3v3 with Rel, Draven, and Leona into the Ivern, Xayah, Nautilus in the bot lane, took complete advantage of that, snowballed out of the bot lane, and Caps had some nice roams, and that was pretty much it. I think the Talia pick, when you pick it alongside the Ivern on red side, like, it's not a flex pick anymore. And even though I really liked what Razork was doing with Talia earlier in the series, the thing about Talia jungle, and the only other team that really does this at this point in time is D+. So Canyon and Showmaker flex the Talia back and forth, and that's something that we've seen over the course of the summer. But the thing about Talia is that she's pretty shit early, and she's incredibly susceptible to invades and falling behind. And her clear speed isn't even that fast until you start to get like 4 or 5 points into her queue. And we just saw a very developed game plan when Razork was playing it in game 2 of this series. of we are going to aggressively invade. We're going to push in our top lane with Olaf. Broken Blade's going to come down. Yike is going to provide the CC. It's going to be very, very difficult for Taliyah to farm. So we didn't get to see like the mega Taliyah game that he had, in game 1 versus Mad Lions, where he was able just to kind of farm it out and get these huge advantages. And I think it was a spectacular game from him, by the way. I love seeing Taliyah jungle. It's one of my favorite.
Razork's mega. He actually low-key might be the best EU jungler now. He's just really good, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, despite the fact that he still can't play League of Legends with Humanoid, but at least he has Trimby now.
In spite of that. Exactly.
At least he has Trimby now, or at least Humanoid has Trimby now, I should say. It's more accurate. Trimby rocks up to mid lane and gets Humanoid.
It's really is gank mid for Humanoid. It is if you watch him play. That is actually his job. And then let Razork just do something else on the map, I guess.
Just Razork farm on Taliyah until he shows up with 2,000 more gold than the enemy jungler. Yeah, so I mean, I really like Taliyah jungle, and I really like teams that can flex it. And it's been fun seeing Razork play all these AP junglers throughout the playoffs. But I do think that it was a very clear game plan against this that we saw from G2, and they have been really good at getting these reads on their opponents. And so in spite of the fact that this did go to 4 games, I don't really think of game 3 as a super serious game from G2. But they showed a lot of
that, like you said. There were points where they could have won that too, mate.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they could have won that game. Yeah, they could have won that game.
Well, the big deal for me in the final, this is actually one thing I was quite happy though. At least it fucking hell, it feels like it's been forever. This was actually like a really good Caps performance. Like it was just game to game, just a very good player again. Like if people don't know, even though G2's been this dominant force, he actually hasn't had to do that very often at all this year. Like most times it is other people who are the best players. Like it's like people were saying on Twitter, the crazy thing about this final was it was like inverted. Like Caps actually was the main carry and actually Mickey X had like sort of an off series. Like it's like the one series this year, he just sort of like was whatever. He was just all right, wasn't he?
I mean, I think he had some strong games, but yeah, I think overall it was not his strongest performance. Not to say he was bad by any means. I mean, we got to see the fucking awesome Lissandra support into Rakan again, which seems to be working really well for them. Did he kind of int later in that game? Yeah, there's some happy gaming towards the end of game 2, but they still closed it in 25 minutes. But there was some like overextension and trolling, but that's just who G2 is. You just have to accept that that's who G2 is and move on with your life. They do have a good time at times, and they're not the cleanest teams because they're fucking around and toying with their opponents. And that was a case of that. But yeah, I think Caps had a strong series, got to show a pretty good variety of champions in his pool, including like he was the one who was answering with the Syndra by the end of this series. They did a good job playing around him. Yike had some really good games as well. Like his Rel engages oftentimes were really good in this series. And this is something that we've been talking about, but Yike's ability to be an engaged tank jungler has improved over the course of summer, whether it's Sejuani or Rel or Maokai. This has been his primary job for the last couple of months, and he has struggled at first, but has slowly kind of eased his way into that and learned and grown from this role. So I've been impressed by his growth as a player. And then, of course, Hansama, Broken Blade, both really good. Broken Blade has been the best top laner in Europe this summer, which is amazing after the kind of spring performance he had, but he really powered up in playoffs and then into MSI, and he's been riding that high ever since. So I think G2 overall is looking really good heading into Worlds. I think they're looking good.
No complaints. I agree, actually. Broken Blades had, like, the last sort of split, and then now this split for finals, he's been awesome. He's been easily the best. I mean, the joke is, this is actually the compliment if you're Broken Blade. I watched all the shitters like Evie when they play Cassante. They're just all right on it. When Broken Blade plays Cassante, people just do all that spam where it's like, did 2,700 damage and has an airborne. And like, when they do the spam, that's a sign you actually played the champion well, because I've seen a lot of people play that just average. He's pretty good on it, actually. He's been pretty good in general.
Yeah, I think the thing with Cassante is you really do have to have a good sense of positioning and how to charge up your Qs and then how to use your ultimate effectively, because he's not he basically is he's an inventor of skirmishes. It's not a great like front to back 5v5 team fighting tank. It's a great champion at creating skirmishes and breaking up fights, but it requires you and your team to position well around that and to isolate somebody over the wall and potentially have one of your teammates go with you to kill that person quickly. Also, it does snowball very hard. I mean, he is, if you get an advantage on him, he does snowball really, really really pretty hard. So anyway, I don't think he's as broken as other people say it is. It's just that copy pasta from Showmaker is fun to type. And it is funny.
Because I think the problem is people who are experts don't know. When you do memes like that, but you would mean it like tongue in cheek, you don't really mean it's OP. Plebs just read that and actually think you mean it for real. It's why, like, half the time, like, some of the times the Yumi champion's been complained about me, it wasn't even the thing you could just blind. It was like in certain angles it was OP, but because the meme was like, you just, oh my god, 200 years. It's like the Athenios 200 years meme. People just hear the meme and then repeat it. It's like, it's not even that bad now. I do think Cassante, like, I mean, luckily it will obviously be sorted out soon, but that was an OP champion at times this year, though. That's the problem. Because the problem I had was when it was bad players playing it and they were just raising their floor. Okay, the problem is when really good players played it, it was fucking OP. It reminds me in that sense, this is a fucking reach, but I don't care. It reminds me back in the day of Riven in that sense, Monty. Because if you ever saw a good Riven play, it looks broken as shit. But if someone couldn't do all the like chaining all the animation cancel, then it wasn't that OP. It was like just like not a very good champion even in the game. And the joke is you wouldn't pick it in a pro game. It's just people like Faker would just crack out their mind so they could, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not a bad analogy. And yeah, I think Broken Blade performed really. People are going to remember the game where he got super far ahead and then just hard carried, right? And they will quite easily forget like the last game of this series where he did fine, but it wasn't just, or even the game that they lost, right? It was his game one performance that he just got a super big lead on and took over the entire game, which can happen. But there were other Cassante games in the series that were much less, I would say, I don't want to use the word impressive, but egregious from a balance perspective. It didn't look that OP, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think G2 did really well. I think they were very prepared for their opponents. They showed a good variety of strategies. This was, again, credit to the coaching staff. I think that their ability to quickly read their opponents and pick them apart is pretty damn good. That's very impressive. So Dylan Falco killing it yet again with this roster, team stepping up. And what we need is all of these players to be on form for Worlds, which they were at least in this series. Like we didn't see any kind of terrible performances from any particular player over the course of the series. Like they don't have an obvious, I won't say they have an obvious strong point compared to the Asian teams that are going, because player for player, they're probably still worse than a lot of the Chinese and Korean teams that are going to be attending this tournament. But in Swiss, I think there's a chance that they steal games against the Asian teams. It's possible in a best of one for sure.
I mean, to me, like I say, I think Mickey X is the X factor because unlike certain other players, this guy isn't a rookie in any context. Like the joke is, I actually think Mickey X is better at support than some of the support players on some of the Asian teams. Like some of their players are rookies or people who have limited experience, or they're the passenger and it's like the ADC leads the lane. Like Mickey X is like a guy who's a real playmaker. He's been impervious to the meta this year, and he's already someone with like real experience internationally. He's played this guy, like, let's be real, off the top of my head, he must have played like 20 international best of 5 or something. Like this guy's got a fucking career under his belt, guys. So yeah. I think he's our one chance in the West. Like if that player actually pops off, or as you even saw, dude, he was even doing it in this fight. He still picks the Lissandra support, etc. Like he's really done his best to like expand his champion pool and really show that he can play whatever. And crucially as well, this is why I actually think the Dylan Falco angle is a good one. I know from past teams, there have been teams, let's say certain Fnatic lineups where certain players would actually like draft limit people like Dylan Falco and they couldn't pick more. Like you've got a player who he can only play 2 champions in this angle. The other thing I noticed about this lineup of G2, even more so than the one last year, is they seem super open to whatever the coach wants to draft, mate. They all are willing to play all these weird picks and off-meta ones and unusual combos and that, like the super strong Asian. They've actually been fairly willing to experiment the last few months in general. So it's brilliant if you're a coach and you actually have players who buy into your system, you know?
I also think that the most important job that he has, because his players are very smart, very, long-term veterans who are going to be able to find these angles. He lets them cook, but just enough, right? He doesn't over egg the pudding. He will stabilize any weird picks with some more normal picks on the rest of the team composition, right? Or he'll let them have a good lane matchup, but their win condition with some of the other champions won't fundamentally change, right? So he'll kind of slot in a champion, and if it's good for creating picks like Lissandra, then they might play like a kind of pick style composition around the Lissandra, so the win condition is a little bit more clear. And I think that's really the strength there, is like you get the you get the disruptiveness of some of these picks, and you get the surprise factor of giving your opponent's champions, powerful champions in the meta while having counter picks, but you don't like go completely ham and make win conditions super weird or change the way the team plays on a fundamental level with their win conditions. So that's what I think is really good about him kind of reining it in a little bit.
I do definitely, though, in the Swiss system, want to see them against at least one Asian elite team. I want to see them pull out a Draven.
I think they will.
Just for the hype. Come on, we got it.
I mean, I think they will absolutely do that. They're not a team that's afraid to take risks, which I think is another thing. And they're very confident in their abilities. I think the Draven would absolutely come out if it's not banned, especially in a best of one. I could absolutely see that happening. I also want to remind people that G2 is actually low-key one of the best level 1 teams in the world. And so you just have to have one set play around a level 1 that gets some really big advantages. I mean, look at KT. They basically lost the playoffs from having garbage level 1s at times and like put themselves in these giant holes in these games. Like KT is a team you could easily exploit with a creative level 1 and actually take a win off in a best of 1, I think. So indeed, there are some angles for you, just providing the hopium to European fans.
I mean, there's not a lot of it going around. Actually, that's actually the one thing I would say maybe about the final is that even though they fucked around in the one game, game 3 that you're talking about, in general, there was way less of the fucking happy play though from G2. Like they actually did look a lot better in this one. And I have to say that as a final note for like LEC this year going into Worlds, bear in mind G2 was the one like bright spot you have. At least they did by the end look pretty fucking solid. And if you look at it now, they had what? The 1 5-game series against XL, that's it. Like aside from that, even when they fuck around, they still win convincingly. Like they still do get it done. So like in a way I can still be a bit hyped. Like it's like you say though, the problem is though, I just think this is where like two factors can battle each other though. G2 by the end is really good. The problem they have is I think this is one of the strongest crops of Asian teams we've ever sent to Worlds.
It's very crazy.
Remember, because fucking BLG fucked up in LPL, they're the fucking 3rd seed, guys. They're the 3rd seed. Bro, if they're the 3rd seed, we're in trouble. That team's really strong. They can beat G2. I can say that right now. So I'm hoping, like you, maybe you get a KT angle. Maybe you have a game where, like, I don't know, Thorin ints or something, Weibo fucks up with Carson. Yeah. But you haven't got many angles. You haven't got many. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, there are some beatable too. I think with a form that KT saw in the playoffs, I'm hoping they don't have that form by the time they get the Worlds. But if that's the form that they have, I don't think they're beatable in a best of 5, but I do think in a best of 1, there's an upset potential. With D+, always an upset potential. With Weibo, always an upset potential. The rest of the teams, I think it's much harder given the floors of teams like T1 and Gen.G and JDG and LNG. Given those teams' floors, I think it's a lot harder to upset them. But teams with higher variance, sure. Why not?
Also, by the way, I'll just throw this out there because no one else is going to care about this. But obviously, the like Asian Games thing is going on now, right, Monty? And everyone's like getting into it. When I actually see the lineup for the Asian Games, so people don't know, it's Zeus, Kanavi, Chovy, Ruler, and Carrier. When I look at that lineup, my first thought is, why isn't this just the T1 lineup? Like, if I'm T1, just make this lineup next year or in 2 years or whatever. Like, this lineup actually looks fucking fire, mate. That's bear in mind, it's only going to play this weird exhibition tournament that's like a sort of Olympics for Asia. That's actually a fucking sick lineup of players, though. Like, that's a banger, mate. That's a hell of an all-star team. That could even work in the server, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if T1 wants to spend that much money.
It's sick, though. I would love to see that squad made, mate.
Yeah, and look, at the Asian Games, they started last night, I think, and they convincingly stomped Vietnam. By the way, I looked at it very quickly, and I was confused when I looked at the VOD. Of course, no casting in English, by the way. Okay. Fantastic. So I was on the Korean. But at the venue, by the way, we do have to talk about this a little bit, because they went back like 5 patches.
Oh, right, that's right, yes.
They went.
You can't even practice on the patch that exists, right? It's just you just have to play the official games, basically, right?
So you can, because Riot has created on the
tournament realm,
the practice servers, the tournament realm. So Riot actually has stepped up and done that, which is
fair
great.
Enough. Okay,
but it is patch 13.12. And this was the patch from June and July for the professional scene. So it's 6 patches ago.
It's September right now, guys. What the fuck?
So again,
what?
I fucking hate the Asian games, dude. I fucking hate that they ruined competitive integrity last year because
it's right before Worlds as well. Like, whose idea is this? Like,
they ruined competitive integrity last year because they rescheduled games and then they canceled the fucking event. And they refused to reschedule certain games as well. When, for example, Breon couldn't field their entire roster due to having COVID, they refused to reschedule the game for the tournament that eventually got canceled because of the Chinese COVID lockdowns. So it's already been a complete clown fiesta and lack of competitive integrity. Riot literally decided to sacrifice the competitive integrity of their own leagues for a tournament that eventually got canceled. So already incredibly embarrassing. And now Riot's just like, yeah, we will use patch 1312. Why is this happening? Riot, you control the servers.
Is there a reason they gave us why it has to be the old patch?
I haven't seen a reason. Riot controls the servers of the tournament realm on which the professional games are played. Why are they allowing this to be played on 1312? It's absolutely insane that we would have the players right before Worlds roll back to a patch and they can't practice on it in solo queue. They could only practice on it. And here's the other thing, guys. Who are they practicing against?
The other teams.
It has to be other teams in the Asian games. Exactly. They can't even practice against like teams going to Worlds. So you are taking 5 of the best Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese players who are all going to be performing. I think probably Southeast Asian players, other Southeast Asian players who would be playing at Worlds as well. You're taking them out of Worlds practice to practice on a patch from June. And you can't even have these super teams compete against some of the other teams who might still be competing, practicing or scrimming for Worlds, right? It's just insane. It is absolutely insane. I'm sure that, some of the other players, like professional players, are probably just forming teams to practice against Korea to do them a solid. And because I think a lot of the teams are probably still kind of on vacation. So there might be some players who are around who, will help out their bros or their teammates who are on the Korean team, and probably same thing for the Chinese roster. But it's not a great environment. And it is really crazy that this pushback. I mean, we're pushing back Worlds for this. And on top of that, the finals are a best of 3. They're not even a best of 5. Did you know that?
I didn't know it was best of 3. No,
best of 3 in the finals, not best of 5s. And they have barred the commentators from saying the words "killed" or "blood."
I heard this. Yeah.
So you have to use points. You have to say like the points of the game, and you can't say first blood.
Oh, it's going to be mental, that. Like, put it this way, the kill one's not even as bad. The blood one's mental, like you said. Think about first blood is literally just the go-to terminology. I mean, quite frankly, by the way, even as just a descriptor, think about a million different ways you use the word blood just in a commentary. They blooded him or whatever, like, oh, finally they draw blood. Like, there's a million angles you can do that on.
I mean, how do you replace kills as well? Like, what do you say? Like, double point, triple point, quadra point, penta point?
Exactly. What would you call reckless in this system? Like a point, player or something. What would they call
player?
Exactly. Kill KDA player.
A PDA player.
Exactly. He would be a point, negative point, assist point player. There you go. Because it wouldn't be death, would it? It can't be kill death. So, By the way, that is one thing I've never understood, without making a whole side thing. The weirdest one of all, with the whole like censorship angle within China, which this sort of plays into, Monty, because as everyone will know, famously in League, they wouldn't allow skulls and all that. Right. This is the one thing I find weirdest is, 2 of the things they most heavily like censor against is anything to do with death or time travel. And what's crazy about that is that almost implies like, what do you know that we don't? What do you know about time travel that if I even acknowledge it exists as a premise, that's too much? Like, that actually makes it like, they think it's boring. Like, oh, it's just boring, like, mundane tyranny. That's like mad sexy. That's sort of like, what's going on there? Like, but why though? Like, now I need to know why. I need to know why time travel can't be mentioned. Because if people don't know, apparently like Marvel movies and stuff, they also hate that shit and like trying to edit it all out and stuff.
Well, I think they don't like it because it implies that there could be an alternate timeline of a different Chinese government, and like they can't have even people like entertaining the fact that things could have worked out differently, right?
Because then some guys like, yeah, what if like in that like square during whoa, what's going on? Like, it's over.
They certainly don't want, the time travel movie where somebody goes and causes Chiang Kai-shek to beat Mao in the revolution and they show alternate China. They don't want that at all. That's terrible.
By the way, here's all you need to know though. If you want to get really hyped for Worlds, you know the compliment I just gave Monty, that if I had the money and I was T1, I would just make the lineup of the Asian Games. Here's all you need to know though. Let me read you the roster for the Chinese team in League of Legends, right? You ready for Asian Games? They have Bin as a top laner, pretty fucking sick. They have JJ and Zun as the junglers. They have Knight, understandably. They have Elk, because obviously Ruler's Korean, so they have Elk from BLG as the ADC, and they have Mako, veteran support players as support. Here's all you need to know, Monty. This is how much trouble everyone else who isn't the LPL's in. That lineup isn't better than JDG.
Yeah,
JDG shouldn't upgrade to that lineup. Like, that would be a downgrade. Like, their lineup's so broken, the all-star team of China isn't as good as their lineup. Like, that's how you know we're in a lot of trouble. Because the joke is, who would you even replace, mate? Like, I'd just say I'll stick with the JDG lineup personally. Like, that's too good, mate. That team is too good.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they're the heavy favorites, obviously, going into Worlds. I think barring some insane meta shift, which I'm not even sure would depower them, it would just cause their playstyle to shift. So it's not that 369 can't play carries, but if we go into a carry top meta, it's going to change the way the team plays. And that might be, a failing. But I mean, JDG should be a huge favorite to complete the Grand Slam this year. I think anything else besides a JDG victory at Worlds would be extremely shocking. They're too good. They're set up for success. I think Ruler is the best player in the world right now. They arguably have, we'll do, I think on Power Spike, we're going to do top 10 players, in the Worlds heading into the World Championship. And like, you just have to ask how many of
this time, because Bjergsen isn't playing League of Legends anymore. So you
Bjergsen's he's not there.
The list, freed up, whatever.
But we'll do that.
Have a live in a world in like 2015 where they actually would unironically on Riot's homepage put Bjergsen like top 20 fucking worlds player. Like, get the fuck off my face. Oh, that was the worst, mate. They actually used to do that for real fans. That wasn't even a meme. It's a meme now, but it wasn't back then.
You know what would be some fun off-season content is to go revisit those lists and then compare them with Worlds results and just see how wrong it was, because some of them are just hilariously
there were some
wrong.
mad egregious ones. Yeah, but it wasn't all just NA either, Monty. Every year there'd be one where you just knew someone within their staff was like some Emily Rand character that watched like LMS, and they'd always just pick like some LMS like top laner and have him like 7th best player in the world. You'd be like, I don't know about this guy. So I think you might be overrating this guy a bit. Like, and they just be going, no, but the numbers all check out. Look at his first blood stats. Like,
I respect that you watch all these regions.
Games, I'm fired immediately. I'll say it first.
I respect you watch all these regions, but they're not playing against the top competition. But yeah, I think for the world before Worlds, once I get to Korea, guys, because I'm not in Korea yet. You may have noticed I'm not at home either. I'm in Tahoe right now, where I go every year. But once I get to Korea, we'll do our normal MSI or Worlds Mega preview on Summoning Insight with all the guests, and then we'll also do on Power Spike. We'll do top 10 players. And this is all to say, I haven't made my list yet. I really thought about it, but I mean, there are many players on JDG you would have in the top 10. You definitely have Knight and Ruler, and then I think the other three are also arguable, right? They're very, very good. I mean, this is probably the biggest super team we've ever had.
It's why, to add on to what we've said on past episodes, people might think, if you're smart, wait a minute, doesn't that go, like, think about what I argued about last episode, Monty, about how, like, for G2, they tried to give 3 G2 players MVP of the season, like, points, basically. If you're asking yourself, but wait a minute, how could you have, like, 3 or 4 players in the top 10 players? That's because, think of the scale we are talking about. We are taking that condition, Monty, that, like, here's the problem. When the LEC voters vote G2 had 3 of the best, most valuable players, they aren't saying this is is the greatest European team of all time. I am seeing this JDG team, if it wins Worlds, it's going to be the best team to ever play League of Legends. So even though it might sound like, what the fuck, how could they have 4 of the top 10? Because it actually is that cracked. Like, it actually is. Essentially, this is the dream of what you want when you make a super team. It all works, and everyone's at their absolute best. Like, the real joke of this lineup is no one will ever be able to make another team like this ever again. Like, it requires so much luck. You have to just hope certain synergies exist, and they just happen to lock out completely so far, bearing some sort of like nightmare at Worlds itself. But the thing about this team to me as well, as mate, I could see a world where they don't win Worlds, but like I can't see a world where they bomb it. You know, people are doing that thing of like, yeah, but every year the LPL number 1 team. Well, it ain't going to be this year. I'll tell you that much.
The floor
right
is
now.
too high.
Like, worst case scenario, literally, I actually think the worst this team could do is make like playoffs and then maybe meet the wrong team in the quarters. That's it. That's worst. I think they're pretty much a lock for semis or finals.
I think they can sleepwalk the semifinals.
Like,
I mean,
to me,
these players.
If we're lucky, there's a team can beat them, but I don't think the others are going to. Like, maybe one team finds out how to beat them, but that's it. This team's going to be so hard to beat, mate. In a best of 5. Come on.
Yeah, I think also what's crazy when you think about the top 10 players at Worlds is you have nobody from T1 in there because you can't have Faker on an individual level, but Faker's mind control and macro are apparently the reason why this team wins games, which is what we've seen. So I think you have 0 players with the competition between all the Asian teams. Like it's hard to justify having any T1 players within the top 10. It's going to be an interesting Worlds for sure. And I think narrowing down to the top 10 players is really quite challenging. There's a lot of good players going to be there this year. I did have one other topic that I wanted to discuss before we go into our viewer questions.
By the way, for the viewer questions, we'll do a bunch to make up for the fact we couldn't do any last episode. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, we got time. So I want to talk about Dash. Because basically we can now reflect after Dash, after Dash now has not been there for some time, which is that.
Wait, but I'll just say something. One thing I noticed. I'll give you credit, Monty. You know how important credit is to me. It's more to other people. They're not that big a deal. They fucking slept on your joke on Power Spike or whatever it was. I saw that little clip that like the producer put onto like Instagram. So Monty made a whole thing about Dash and about how obviously no one watched him when he was streaming. And there was 2 straight fire jokes that they're just sleeping on. One was Monty made a whole thing about how obviously he's part of the Riot Content Creator Collective. That's straight fire. He was referencing the Danny thing, obviously, but how that got like fuck all extra views. But that's what they did with Dash when he left being the host. And then the other thing, and this is the saddest of all, is cause like Dagon or something was like, yeah, and he won the host of the year. Then Monty goes, yeah, well, he's going to win the ghost of the year this year. And they didn't even react. Like, that's actually a banger.
I was sad about that.
That was a fucking banger. Fair play. You deserve your props on that one. That was good. We'll run it back. There you go. No problem.
Esports host to esports ghost of the year. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, it's depressing, but I just want to go back and talk about this because I think it's important to show how Riot treats their talent and all of the lies that they told about Dash this year. Okay. Because after this last LCS finals, he kind of gave that send off that basically implied that he wasn't going to be working with Riot anymore, or at least in extremely limited capacity. He made a tweet that made it seem like he's not coming back. And we just have to think about how this even unfolded, which is really like rather crazy. And I want to give Dash a lot of credit to his professionalism because I would have lost my shit publicly if this happened to me. Because remember,
he still hasn't even leaked anything that went on. I think he's sort of kept it stum, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think like look at what happened to him. He was told like late last year that he wasn't going to be coming back for this year, and he still held it together, did the rest of the season. He was told months in advance.
Right.
And he continued to just power through the rest of the season. He powered through the World Championship, didn't say a damn thing, and then kind of made an announcement after he was done at Worlds, I believe. I believe that was the timeline,
right.
when everything was done, that he wasn't going to be returning to LCS next year. And obviously this caused a huge like fan backlash because he's extremely good at his job. He had just won, the esports host of the year, had been recognized by the industry. And they said, "Oh yeah, well we're gonna move to a system on LCS where we don't really need a host, right? We don't really need a host.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Except now we can take a look back at the product that the LCS created, and we can say definitively, that no, they just replaced Dash with like Jat or another person who is on the desk who is leading the conversation. So the question becomes, was this better without Dash? The answer was no. Dash would have done a better job within that system that you wanted. And as I pointed out previously, how ridiculous this premise was, he is a professionally trained actor. If you are going to be moving towards more skits and memes, when he was in skits previously, he was the best person in those skits. If you want somebody to do that kind of content, you literally want Dash to do that. He is the one who is trained professionally to do that. He was the best at it by a pretty large margin. You didn't have a reason to remove him from the desk because ultimately you didn't change the desk that much. You put them on couches instead of behind a desk. That's what you did. And then you just had somebody else lead the conversation. Now, of course, they promised, oh yeah, well, Dash is going to be back. And they did that horrible cringe thing where they did that remember, guys, they did that video where it was like Dash is back and there's all the welcome back Dash fireworks and they spent a bunch of money and they used him for like a day or two and then he's gone again. And remember, they also promised, speaking of that skydiving movie or the skydiving feature that we talked about earlier, they said, well, we're going to hire Dash and he's going to do this content on the side and he's going to do this high production stuff and get to know the players better. They did one episode and that was it. And it never happened again. So all of the things they said about Dash were just lies. Riot just lied. They didn't do any of the things that they said they were going to do. They completely fucked him. He dedicated years and years of his life to this, and they got rid of him. He didn't have any kind of protections because he was a freelancer with the company, and he didn't have any leverage to go anywhere else because apparently nobody else wants to hire him in any of the other regions either, right? So this is how Riot treats people, and like, I don't know what to tell the other casters in this scene, but if you can't see that the writing is on the wall, if they're willing to fuck Dash up like this, lie to him about his future employment prospects, tell the fans, tell everybody publicly that he is going to be doing these things, and then do none of those things that he was probably relying on for income. He's basically just been trapped this entire year in a cycle of, will Riot continue to hire me or not? Which also, by the way, prevents him from getting potentially other jobs because he wants to be available when they are telling him they are going to make this content with him that they just don't make.
Even though I will say I don't claim within Valorant to have any like secret sources for this particular topic. I'm just as an outsider speculating and someone who knows the industry. Another thing I also found very sus, by the way, Monty, is people might not know this, but last year Dash was also doing a bunch of the Valorant stuff as well for Riot as LCS. And at the beginning of the year, he also started doing that. He did the lock-in tournament. He did the Americas thing. He isn't on the rest of the Valorant circuit either. So the other thing that's really weird here, Monty, is it's almost like they explicitly don't want him. Because to me, the obvious, I thought even a cynical answer would be like, Valorant's the new hot game, so we're moving him over to that, and, we're going to do something different with LCS. They didn't even do that. They actually just, as usual, have cut off their nose despite their face. Like, I don't get it, because to me, he is like a multi-game talent who can clearly be good in any game, can't he? Like, it's not like he's there for special knowledge of League. Like, he's actually one of those guys where what's good is you never notice that they're not an expert. They just stay within their lane, do their shit, set the other guy up, and then he's just a fucking professional, and he's just a very polished professional. I think he's good as well. Always enjoyed watching him.
He's very good. And it just makes me super depressed because, again, there's no closing of ranks from the LCS casters who could have gotten together and said, no.
Y'all are feeling uncomfortable about the theoretical reality of casting a game with scabs, but you won't even band together to help your own colleagues get fucked. Come on. And also, if you're Riot, you just didn't understand priorities. If there's any talent on your broadcast that people still wanted to see jump out of a plane, it was Gabby Durden, not Dash. Whatever.
Jesus.
You're getting the parachutes. You're getting the joke. Sorry, they survived in this one. It's a good joke. It's a good setup. It's all good. Yeah.
No, I think I think that this was clearly just a cost-saving measure. I think he was the most expensive member.
Will have been, I'm sure. Yeah.
Of the LCS broadcast, and he was there every single day. And as I've said, this has to be a precursor for things in the future, guys. LCS viewership dropped when Dash was not on the broadcast, but they're going to say, oh no, it was because of the time change or the date change or declining viewership in NA, which is probably the truth. I don't think people stopped watching because Dash wasn't on the broadcast.
No,
because,
of course not.
that's just the reality. And as we have more and more co-streamers, it matters less and less who the talent is on the broadcast, because they can just let the co-streamers carry the heavy load, and the casters are just kind of the soft voices in the background. And people who are hardcore fans who maybe don't like, the main broadcast because they don't have the best professionals on there anymore, are just going to go watch the co-streamers instead, right? And especially if they give Cadril, LCS co-streaming, which they still haven't yet. Kind of mysterious. I was going to slide this one out there. Really weird how LCS hasn't offered any of the current casters for Riot co-streaming. It's almost like they're intentionally barring them from doing that for a particular reason. Maybe it's because they don't want those casters, when they're not casting LCS, to get a bigger following and make more money than they could from Riot. Because I bet you if Captain Flowers was doing days of LCS that he wasn't on, he would probably make more money than he would from Riot. He'd probably make more money. So it's been really cynical the way that Riot has dealt with co-streaming. Like, they gave Dash co-streaming because they didn't have him on the broadcast anymore, but they still haven't given it to Cadril, which is just like really weird. You would think you would want his potential viewership when he does so much for LCK and LPL, and they haven't given any other active casters those roles either. But we're coming to a very cynical point where, it wouldn't surprise me to see a big mix-up, as I've said many times, with the LCS casting crew just for cost reasons this next year. I'm pretty sure that's what happened with Dash.
At the time of the last episode, they probably bring in randoms or people from like Brazil and Latin America and smaller places, right?
Well, why wouldn't they? They already gave all of the Academy casters days within LCS. And as I said, I think they're probably just testing to see, does that decrease viewership or not? Doesn't have an effect on the overall broadcast, because they certainly could have scheduled things differently this summer with the casters and just used all of their premier talent more regularly. It's no problem to cast 3 days a week. They were doing 5 games a day, 3 games a week. I could have done all 15 games every single week when I was casting. That's not a problem. And they don't do that. So
The thing I'll never be able to get over, though, is it'll always be so alien to me coming from CSGO that, like, if you're one of the best casters in the world, but in the English language, then by default, you don't do the best games. That will always bake my noodle, Monty, because, like, the best thing about CSGO for me is, like, if people don't know, I was a massive elitist. Like, I even used to turn down a bunch of the tier 2 events that had mad money, because it's like, I used to actually say to them, like, yeah, but I'll just be honest with you, I'm not going to be that engaged because you don't have the good teams. Like, I want to see the top 10 teams play. So the craziest thing to me is, like, the main reason to have the best talent on the LCS isn't actually even like it brings viewership stuff. In my opinion, the best reason, and sadly this doesn't work on Riot do not feel shame, is the idea that you yourself, if you're Riot, want to brag. Like, if I go to the esports awards, Monty, and I'm the person from Riot, I want to be able to turn to the guys who do ESL CSGO stuff and Dota and stuff and go, we have the best broadcast. Have you ever watched our broadcast? Our talent's the shit. I don't want to be like, well, you know, I mean, who cares about broadcast, right? Oh, right, you have all the legends. I just have like some brand new guy who just started. Like, that sounds shit. Like, how about for your own self-respect? Shouldn't you want your broadcast to have awesome talent that put together something you'd be proud of, or your kids could watch in 10 years, a big final? It'd be super. Because that's the other thing that people take for granted. Mate, when I first got into the NFL like 10 years ago or whatever, I remember going and watching games and being like, wow, some of this talent's fucking amazing. Some of these people, like, I've never heard of. Like, they're really good. Like fucking Chris, whatever his name is, Collinsworth's really good. It's mega. He's like got great on-camera presence. Like, if you watched LCS now in 2023, it should be the most developed. It might have their worst product now. Like, now it's all over the place. Like, it's a mix of like a couple of. What's weird is I don't really know the logic. Like, again, I haven't actually tried to pry into this scene, guys. I'm talking mainly as an outsider. Like, it's always been puzzling to me. Like, why are Raz and Mark Z like the only people who are like fucking made men in Riot and just are there every season? Like, I like both of them, but they're not like they're not Cadril or something. You know, like, I don't get it. I don't get the logic of the lineups. I don't get why they bring in Gabby Durden, but then also sort of throw to the Wolves, and now she's gone. Like, I don't know what they're sort of going. Like, what's even the flavor they're going for LCS? I'm not sure what it is, mate.
I mean, they also just continue to bring back, as you point out, the same people over and over again, which if you're looking for a younger audience, and it's not a slight against any of these people, but perhaps if you're a Zoomer, you don't necessarily want to see some dudes in their late 30s at this point in time on the main broadcast. And we say this as guys in our late 30s / early 40s, but we create a show for people who like this kind of content, right? the goal of Last Free Nation is to serve a more mature esports
when
audience.
you say that, though, it does make me think that, when I get that gel, I can do that like Zoomer cut. It makes me think we should have like a 10-minute version of Someone Insight where it's just me like the Zoomer cut, like, hey, three, like, just to do like,
Slay King.
Exactly, see if it works. Maybe that demographic does work.
Yeah, look, we just know that we're not going to be, we're not here to entertain 19-year-olds. That's just the fact.
But I would also, logically, I would take all my real points, but I'd fuck them all up into Zoomer talk. So instead of making like a really impassioned point I made earlier about the GM, it'd just be all shit like, little bro Dardo thought he was on the team. He was just picking the play, some shit. It'd be all the shit they all say as well. Bruh thinks he's on the team and all that. Like, what is blood waffling about? Like, I can't have the soundboard level of this generation.
So this is the point is like LFN was very deliberately constructed to be something for 25 plus esports demographic.
It's a more serious point though that ties into something we've talked about before. If I were them, Monty, no joke, bearing in mind we're in a co-streaming world where people get to pick what they want, I would actually unironically do 2 broadcasts, mate. I would do like a really fun casual Zoomer podcast version, and I would have like a boomer one like we're talking about, like for the people. I'd essentially have like the adults one and the kids one. I wouldn't call it that, obviously, you'd name it differently. Like you'd give it some cool angle, but like I would actually do it for real. Why not?
Yeah, why not? I totally agree. But my point is
it's not that much between those audiences. It's not really great overlap.
My point is that if they want to have content and their idea is to attract a younger, fresh audience to the LCS, I don't think it's possible to do that with a bunch of boomers. That's just my take. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the boomers can figure it out, but I don't think they're, the people, the talent on that broadcast are going to be the ones who are bringing in the young generation to make this cool again. Like they have younger people. Let's compare this to Valorant. Okay. Valorant in North America is, I think, doing better in terms of player base. It certainly is doing better in Gen Z cultural relevance in America than League of Legends is right now. And let's think about the talent that they have on that broadcast. Yeah, sure. I mean, they have some people, like they have some people I worked with on the Overwatch League. So Golden Boy is my age, for example, but he's the host. So it's a little bit different. You can have kind of a more mature person in that role. But some of the other guys that I worked with on Overwatch League, I think, like Sideshow and Brenner, they're late 20s now, which is like an aspirational age, at least for early 20-something Zoomers, right? And then they also have like, I think Mimi, Evil Cat is like 20. She's like young. A fixture. Yeah, 20, 21. She's great. She's a fixture on their desk now. But for the most part, outside of like Golden Boy and Sean Gares, the talent skews a lot younger, and I think that's attractive. And also, by the way, guys, when League of Legends was popular, a lot of us who were casters 10 years ago were at the age that like Sideshow and Bren are now. And now we're all just fucking boomers. And like, I'm happy to make content for boomers. That's totally cool for me. It serves my interest these days and the things that I want to do with my life and my career. But if you want to create a culturally relevant broadcast to younger people, you can't just have only boomers on your broadcast. You can't do that. And it's like they're obsessed with keeping all of these people around. And again, it's not that I think these people are bad. I think the LCS talent is generally quite strong. I just don't think it's going to accomplish the product goal that you want it to accomplish. So that's it. And I feel bad for Dash.
Dead, so it's over.
Also, viewership is down enormously.
By the way, sucks for Dash. Like, what's he going to do the rest of his career? Remember, his problem is he put all his eggs in the League and Valorant basket, and now he's doing what? Fuck all, nothing, who knows?
And how is this not a stark warning? This should be a neon flashing warning to everybody who's worked at Riot that they will just throw you away without a second thought. Then they will lie to you about the things that you will do in the future. They will tell you you are doing shows of which you do one episode of, and then they never contract you again. And I think people have totally missed the point about what happened to Dash, which is that he got fucked. And Riot told you repeatedly, publicly, that he wasn't getting fucked. But now we can just look, because LCS is over. He's not coming back for Worlds. Did he get fucked in the year of our Lord 2023? The answer is yes. He got unequivocally fucked. And I feel so bad for him. And I think anybody who works at Riot in a talent or casting capacity should be looking for alternative career options immediately, because this shit is not viable, and you don't want to be dumped on your ass when you're in your mid to late 30s without anything else you could possibly do or another way to make money. That is garbage. And I think people are not outraged about this because Riot is getting away with this actively because they told you things to placate you and then you forgot about it.
All right, here, I'll do that thing where what I do is it's actually more of a Monty approach, but I'll take a turn doing it. Where what I do is I make it sound like, as part of the abstract discussion, I'm just suggesting a good faith solution, but the solution just plays entirely into my wheelhouse and what I want and what benefits me. So basically, this is why, Monty, I'll even do it like you. This is why all the bloody talent should start appearing on our shows and not turning us down because they're scared and trying to keep Riot happy. Because actually, as a serious point, we're actually one of the only games in town with what we're trying to do with like sponsors and stuff, where in the future it might be possible to have a real side gig just doing content, but that also keeps you relevant in the game and it keeps you interested for people to hire you. Because right now, like I would have said if we weren't doing this company, that people like Dash, I think a mistake is that they just did the dive. They didn't make their own side podcast with players that they know and talent and build up a whole vibe. Because I actually do think in the future, like you see here, the second Riot doesn't hire you anymore, there is no other game in town. It's over. Like your visibility in the game disappears. And we're at the point now where like the joke is, if you asked a random LCS fan, when did Dash quit? I think some of them would think it was last year, mate. Like it feels like it was ages ago, doesn't it? It was only at the beginning of this year, guys. Like it feels like it was fucking ages ago now. So the sad thing is I actually do hope that, because that's one thing. Obviously, there's also a point there, subtle point I'm trying to make to talent, which is talent by default. Sometimes it's not even that Riot says to them. In fact, as far as I know, Monty, Riot's never saying to them, don't do podcasts. They just think, oh, but I know Riot isn't happy with these guys, so they don't do it. But then again, like Monty says, at the end, when they inevitably fuck all of you, we're exactly where you'd want to come onto our show. It's too late now, isn't it? Like, it could have been on for years. Could have made it work. I mean, I'll even say, by the way, I think of some of the names I just mentioned, Raz, Mark, they balanced both for like half a decade, guys. You can do both. So in my opinion, there's another mistake. Don't just only make Riot your only platform. Build something else up on the side. Do like a podcast. Like, because the sad thing is, I just think of all those podcasts Dagon does. Dash is like the same skill set. He could be a mega fucking host for a podcast like that. He's also got a great sense of humor. He knows the people. Like, this is another example why you don't want to, because remember, the key thing, like you've talked about in the past, is ever since Riot started having people be freelance, mate, you've got to pick up on that. Like, that's a massive warning sign. That means this is not a company that you can work for 30 years. They aren't going to hire you. Eventually, they're going to replace you with someone younger, hotter, cooler, more popular. So at this point, you've got to have like, do the Riot thing for your like meat and potatoes, but you've got to have a side hustle too that you can transition to if needed, because that's also a sad thing. Like I say, when these people just only appear on their stream, it's like not only is no one going to go there, but you're not really doing on your stream what I like to see you do as talent. Like I want to see you be a host or do an awesome setup. Like, so you got to have something akin to that, in my opinion. So I just think it's a waste of time as well. Like the amount of this talent that only does Riot stuff. Like, come on, branch out a bit.
Yeah, and the reason why, Thorin and I and everybody else who's affiliated with Last Free Nation helped found this company and are building it up right now is because everybody gets equity. You never get equity in fucking Riot Games esports. You never get anything, and they just dump your ass at the end of the day. The point of LFN is that the talent actually finally fucking owns something in this industry, and it's talent owned, talent run, talent creative controlled. Literally, the board of this company cannot say anything about the content of the shows. They can't.
I'll give you a suggestion. Imagine, if you will, John Lennon style, except I'm not a piece of shit and I'm alive, so I win on two there, John. Aside, I don't know why I'm straight shots at John Lennon. In many ways, a bit late on that one. Again, he's dead. So what I would say is this: when it comes to
straight shots at John Lennon is actually in itself a good reference.
when it comes to imagining another world, imagine this world. If people might know, in CSGO on our network, Last Free Nation on the CSGO channel, I do a podcast where I came up with this concept that you intentionally give hot takes. It's not like accidental and everyone gets. Essentially, the premise is people can't get mad because you're going out your way to generate hot takes. Imagine a hot take, and you're going to think I'm joking here, but I'm actually absolutely serious with this casting. I think this will be straight fire. Imagine that show, Hot Take Point Made, where the point is to come with crazy hot takes, and one of the permanent co-hosts is Freak. That would be amazing. Great. That would actually be fucking. Imagine it was like me, Dom, and Freak or something. That would actually be box
be a great
office. Show. Who the fuck wouldn't tune into that? That would be amazing, wouldn't it? Like that would actually do exactly what you want on the box. It'd be perfect. And I would love to get that as well. I bet fucking Freak would kill it, mate. He wouldn't do it, obviously. We have no connection, but he would be fucking sick at exactly that sort of content, wouldn't he?
Yeah. He'd be wonderful at that stuff. I totally agree with you. Yeah, and we'll
John Lennon and whatever. Whatever.
I'm not a big Beatles fan, but I don't have John Lennon opinions that strong. But yeah, you just have to think about how this stuff works. And, I encourage, to your point though, and I do encourage the other talent to they should have been thinking about this for years. And at a certain point, when you're 10 years deep in your League of Legends casting career and you haven't figured this shit out yet, and you're casting like 2 days a week and you got the rest of your week to do shit, I don't really have a lot of sympathy for you, considering that when I was casting League of Legends, I was coaching a professional team doing 10 best of threes a week, and I was still doing shows. So I don't understand why these other people can't fucking do anything. It's actually outrageous that you have wasted years of your life not building up anything for yourself on a freelance contract, just hoping that you remain relevant with no fucking backup plan whatsoever. Hilariously, the only person who had a backup plan was Freak at the end of the day.
Yeah. Or Jat, if he'd chosen to stay on the design team.
Or Jat.
They at least, a fair play to them, you're right. They at least the whole time were angling for what they might do next and what they might do in the Riot and getting the right relationship. So fair play, they did get it. By the way, here's the other reason that it's actually criminal how bad the LCS is now. You know what? Everyone else thinks this is a whack take, but you know what else vibes me when I say this? They all think I'm just like reaching when I say that they should have made better use of local, right? People don't get it, mate. You know this. Dude, a few years ago, before they fucked him over, dude, this guy would have been the most loyal LCS employee ever if you'd have put him on your broadcast. And he is literally, as we have shown on our content, the joke is, if he can handle it, he's like an automatic punchline to every joke. He just makes all the scenarios funnier and more fun and more entertaining. Like, it would actually be fire. Like that. And obviously now he's gone, by the way. It's too late now. He years ago went and he's done all the fucking programming and now the NFT stuff. He's not coming back now. That ship has sailed, but what a waste of time. This guy really wanted to be part of the broadcast too, I'm telling you, he really did.
Also, he was fully bilingual, so you can actually make fun content with Korean players.
You could have brought on Prince and people like that. Exactly, yeah.
Hilariously, he even played at the same time as players like Impact, and you could have. Yes. They've had a rapport for many, many years as a result.
Here's an example. I'll just spitball. This is why, by the way, when we actually get the funding, we are just going to shit on everyone with this company, because I'll tell you in 5 seconds what I immediately thought of as a segment I'd have Loco Doco do. I'd have him do a segment, Monty, during each split called Loco's Breaking Point, in which he picks the team that's at their breaking point and what the key moment's going to be as to whether they make it or they don't. And if you don't, at the end of the season, he smashes a keyboard.
That's great.
There you go. Perfect.
Into a pinata of the
exactly.
Team's logo.
Yes.
I love it. So yeah, that was just, we had some extra time this week because it was just the LEC matches, and I just wanted to point this out because I just feel like nobody is talking about this, me saying it isn't going to prevent Riot from getting away with it, because they always just fucking get away with it. Apparently, it's just impossible for them not to get away with it. But maybe there's a little bit more awareness now about all the lies they told about Dash and his really shitty situation.
The other thing I'd say as well is this is why you can't only cite the viewership, Monty, because to me, there is a qualitative difference between the exact same 50k people watching and then loads of them just every week going, I hate Gabby Durden, she sucks, get her off the block. Or the same 50k watching, but then going, this is brilliant, I actually enjoy this stuff. Surely there's a qualitative difference there. Surely just the number itself can't be the be all end all. Because the other thing I thought sucked was, I have an opinion that's very different to a lot of people, Monty. I actually personally think if you ask someone to do something and then they say they can do it and then they fail, okay, fair enough, they failed you, right? Say you ask them again, are you sure you can actually do this? And they say, no, I can. And they fail again. That might still be on them. Maybe you gave them 2 chances. Eventually, it's your fault if you keep putting them in that position again. My problem with the whole Gabby Durden thing was, the way it was on the wall, the first split, mate, and they just ran it into the ground. They just made it till the very... I even almost feel like at the end, by the way, they were almost letting her be out there. So she'd be the flak for all the hate. And at the end, they could just be and she's moving on. So it's a clean way to just remove the problem, as it were. But I thought they even did her dirty, mate. They just fucking put her... They hung her out there to be the fucking... She was in the stocks getting all the tomatoes pelted at her. The joke is, it's actually the broadcast people didn't like, but they all just zeroed in on her casting as the only thing that was the problem, wasn't it?
And there's been no reward for these people. The casters saw some level of increase in pay when the LCS started getting more popular. But I can just tell you this right now, guys, and maybe you think this is a lot of money. You can choose what you want to believe about this. But I can tell you right now that no caster has ever made more than 300K casting the Riot circuit from Riot, including people who did entireties of leagues, all the international events, international finals, and you have to try really hard. I don't even think they've made 250, frankly. I'd be surprised if maybe they made 250, but this is the maximum amount of money you could earn. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is like the average pay of the LCS during the last few years for players was like $300,000 or $400,000. So that the shitty players on the shitty teams that played 2 splits, didn't go to MSI, didn't go to Worlds, played 6 months out of the year. And guess what? The players also had all their housing taken care of, all their food taken care of in LA. They had health insurance provided by the teams because they were employees, right? Meanwhile, the casters are paying for all of this shit out of pocket. And so it's depressing that these casters, and they were on freelance contracts and could be dumped immediately, right? With like Dash was. And so, if you're making it's not bad money. I'm not trying to say that $250,000 is bad money, but there's no security, and it wasn't tracking with the players. Like, imagine being the best caster in the world, and you're getting paid less than the average player. Now, if you take sports, so take the NFL, there are commentators that make $10 million a year in the NFL. Like the best NFL commentators make that much money, and they're doing one game a week. One game. Like Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, one game a week for a 7-month season. And they're making more than the average player does in the NFL. So the economics were just never there for casters, and they didn't get more money or significantly more money, even though players in the LCS were on contracts that were, 5-6 times their annual pay, if not more.
Well, but the thing is, someone doesn't know the real world of how, like, actually all the fucking expenses break down. When you say that, Monty, when you say no one's ever made 300K or they're making 250K, they are going to think that's more money than it is, Monty, because they're not going to realize, like, first things first, let's say it's 250K, right? So let's immediately just take the tax off, Monty. Well, that's a solid, like, 80 or 90K right there. So we're already down to, like, 150, 160K. Then let's take your rent off there. That's going to be 30, 40K right there. So we're already down to under 100K. Let's say we're at like 90K now. You just mentioned there you need health insurance. That's going to be a few thousand. Let's say
500 a month, probably like 6,000 a year for a single person.
So let's say like safely 5-6K. That all of a sudden you're down to like what 70. We haven't even spent a fucking penny yet. We haven't bought a trainer, a sneaker, a video game, a skin,
food.
We haven't spent anything yet. And remember, because you live in LA, also the assumption is you're going to go out to bars and clubs. Mate, you're gonna have nothing out of that. Like that sounds like about 250K. You're gonna have nothing left over out there. No
also, you have to have a car in Los Angeles,
and your PC, and your all the shit, everything, home internet. The costs are people. That's where people do that thing. It's like they do it in sports as well. To be fair, they just look at the net number and they act like you're getting that in your pocket. You're not. Like we say, it sounds good, but you have to remember you live in LA and it's America and health insurance. Like there's the other thing, Monty. This is where it doesn't compare at all. You know when people compared, like because of the LCS walkout, all the costs of Europe. Bro, could you even imagine with if I get that 250K and I live in bloody Berlin? I'm laughing, mate. I've got all the insurance already from the government. You know what I mean? Like, mate, the actual amount more I would see of that money would be crazy. Like, there's even something I wonder about because it hasn't ever happened. I want to see what you think about this. They've never, because the past LEC was always like the bitch league and the secondary league. Why, bear in mind, we're just speaking English. Also, why are there casters for regions? What's that about? Surely English talent should all be competing with each other. Surely now LCS people should want to come to LEC or vice versa. Why not? Why is that not a thing still? Shouldn't that be aspirational,
That was always the question I had. Why isn't it aspirational to work in the LCK? Like, surely you should want to go live in Seoul like I did and work on one of the better leagues. Yes. Like, I understand why people didn't want to or couldn't go to China during the COVID lockdowns, obviously for the LPL, that it was better for people to be in Europe. Also, the LPL just pays a lot less than the other leagues, even though it is arguably the best league right now. Their broadcast day rates, because the Chinese don't care about the English stream, whereas the Korean audience is large. The audience for Korean games in English is larger. because of the history of the league and people's affinity for the Korean broadcast over time that they built. They become fans of the teams and the LCK itself because of their dedication to the English side. And we're seeing, better numbers on LPL constantly, especially with people like Dom and Cadril who are actively promoting them. They've got really good casters, I think, over in the LPL right now as well, which helps a lot. So we've seen the LPL get substantially more popular in English over the last few years, but it's still got a ways to go to catch up with LCK, which makes sense. But yeah, it's not really aspirational. But in LCK, the money is there. It's actually, you get paid less in the LCK, but because cost of living is significantly lower in Korea, you actually make more money in the end. So it's actually probably the best place to be right now.
In itself, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
You're on. If I live in Korea, there's some minor downsides. There's all the upsides. Fuck anyone who thinks this is 1990 and it's like, but you get to live in LA. Like, that's a downside. That's actually an immediate negative. Like, yeah, that guy might kill me for heroin when I walk under a bridge. Brilliant. Like, what? And it's not like as he's killing me, I'd say, oh, but hey, that's Will Ferrell over there. Like, you don't get the upside of living there, you idiots. You just get all the downside, don't you? Get like the heroin junkie guy killing you. Although obviously, if I come at the right time, Monty, technically, if I was at the right time, the heroin junkie killing me. Oh, are you Robert Downey Jr.? Well, yeah, but you're going to be using it. Obviously, if it's in the past, it would work, but not now. That's
also,
good.
you're still dead at the end of the day, so
yeah, exactly.
Not the way I would want to die. But
now you just died from Robert Downey Jr.
In any case, I'm not. I wouldn't. I'm in the process of selling my house in LA right now, so I'm out. I'm out, boys.
It's a good place to live and raise kids and that. Yeah, so put a good offer in for Monty. Just stay away from Robert Downey Jr. basically, or anyone blacklisted.
Only if you have a time machine,
exactly.
which is illegal in China.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, he's doing great now. So yeah,
for the Chinese VOD, we'll just edit out that reference to a time machine. Then just don't go to LA. That's it. We'll just leave it at that.
It's also why Genja was never allowed in China, because he is in fact a Time Lord, and he could have disrupted the Chinese government in the past or future. Exactly. Who knows what's going to happen?
The joke is Genja just turns up in Tiananmen Square on Kog'Maw with fucking Triforce. There you go. The only bill that could have stopped it, Monty. No one knew him. And Doublelift obviously said that wouldn't work, but he was wrong. There you go.
To be fair, I also said that wouldn't work, but then they changed the item, and then people beamed to me because they changed it, and then it worked.
I will say, by the way, he's more legit, but LS a couple of times has sort of tried to do that, being like, and who said this champion was good 3 years ago? And they're like, what the 3 years ago? Like, who was saying the same champion? Yeah, he's done a few of those where it's like, I was telling you guys to pick this years ago. And it's like, yeah, I don't know about that, mate. I don't know if you meant it in this context, but we'll give you that one. You get bonus points. How about that? You get bonus points. Not full points. Well,
something that you should pick up right now, though, is HelloFresh, by the way, which is our sponsor again for this week of the show. I know a lot of you have redeemed our code, which we very much appreciate. I've had a lot of messages about that. But please do that if you guys are looking for a meal kit program to use. I've been using it myself. It has been really excellent for me and my family. Basically, what happens is they ship you a delightful box of entirely fresh ingredients. You only have to have usually something like olive oil, salt, pepper, butter, sugar, the basics. I'm trying to think of things I've had to have. I think that's pretty much it. So as long as you have some knives and a cutting board, they'll send you everything you need. There isn't any leftover waste as well, which makes it very efficient. It gets shipped right to your door. It's cheaper and better for you oftentimes than eating takeout. Can teach you to cook as well for those of you guys who want that experience, because the recipe cards are really easy to follow. It's all on one page. So you get new dishes every week. You can select from their menu. Tons of different things. There's like low carb dishes. If you guys are going keto, all you have to do is go to HelloFresh.com/50, which is 50LFN for Last Free Nation, and use the promo code 50LFN. It's really good. I've enjoyed, especially when I'm working during the day, instead of just like eating garbage for lunch, you can get 15-minute prep lunches that are completely fresh. So it's really quick and easy. You can do that for lunch, dinner, breakfast, all of that stuff. And you can add snacks. So there's a bunch of add-ons to the boxes. So once you select your meal, you can pick a bunch of other options and add-ons for the boxes to deliver to your house. And the more meals you get, the cheaper it gets for every single meal. So if you want to learn how to cook, or you're an established cook like I am, I still find it very useful to kind of round out the rest of my meal plan. And it makes it kind of a lot less burdensome because I don't have to plan quite as many meals that week. I can just select a couple options and still cook at home and not have to worry about all the stuff I need to get from the grocery store. So anyway, I would go and do that if you guys want to support us. So if you have been looking at a meal kit, I can tell you from using this from the last year myself that it is a product I genuinely enjoy and endorse. So there you go. We don't try and give you guys garbage here on LFN. We do things, we do partnerships that we like, and HelloFresh is definitely one of them. So go do that. Again, code 50 LFN.
As you said, another low-key aspect that's actually underrated is obviously it does say like how many calories is in the food and stuff like that, like, so you know exactly. And another thing is when you get takeout, the downside is this, because most restaurants don't have to care what your dietary restrictions are or what you want. They famously, restaurants, the reason why that sauce tastes delicious, they just put loads of sugar in that and MSG and all that. Like, you're not going to do that at home. You're going to make actual proper food without any hidden ingredients, aren't you?
Yeah, or like butter, obviously very famous.
So that in all the steak,
too much butter, like way too much. But the reason why you keep eating restaurant food, and I can tell you this as somebody who has also cooked in restaurants, is there's stuff you probably wouldn't put in food at home. Like I very rarely cook with sugar, or if I do, it's like a teaspoon, here or there, but you'll just get that loaded into your food at restaurants. It's not necessary.
Even what it's traditional food, like Italian food, the reason it tastes way better is how much sugar they put in that bloody marinara sauce, like way more than you'd ever put in at home. Like, I'll give you a random aside. Do you remember that story, Monty, of when I first came to Korea? There used to be that coffee shop at the bottom of your road. You know what I'm on about, where you used to go. Because I don't drink coffee, I would get that lemonade. Do you remember, like a delicious?
Yes.
It was sort of
that's very good lemonade.
It was implied, guys, that it was like sort of like your southern grandma's lemonade you have on the veranda or whatever, right? But here's the problem, Monty. I went one day and saw them making it, and when they made it, mate, they took out this giant bag of sugar, and I thought by the way he's holding it, he's going to tip a bit in from the end, and he just poured the whole thing in, and then that was like, it was only like a thing this big, the tank. He poured a whole thing of sugar in, and there was like, it's just, buddy, the joke is just an excuse to drink pure sugar at this point. Like, the hell?
It is good though. It was really good.
It was, to be fair. Understandably, yeah. It was cracked out, mate. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. So anyway, this also allows you to see kind of what goes into your food, and if you want less salt or less sugar or less butter, you can make those decisions for yourself.
Your palate, exactly.
You can make those decisions for yourself.
Yes.
But obviously, cooking at home going to be much better for you than eating takeout at restaurants. Also,
it's also underratedly fun, because there's the other thing, Monty. The problem with normal cooking is it does take skill. Like if you find some like general recipe on the internet, you're having to tweak it to what ingredients you've got. That's stressful. The thing I actually enjoy about these is you actually get a sense of accomplishment when you follow the instructions and it works. Like it's actually like way easier than
that's
you
fun.
think.
That's fun. And you have everything there. You have everything there.
Maybe, I don't know, Power Spike or the Best Damn League, whatever. You get the joke. Just put some podcast on and fucking cook it in it.
That's right. All right. So do sign up for HelloFresh if you guys are interested in that stuff, though, and do use our code. We're going to take a quick break, by the way, and when we come back, we will do a load of viewer questions.
Right, we're back. Time for viewer questions, which we did say on past ones, but we had more limited time then. So we're going to make up for it now and plow through a load of them. As always, if you want to ask a question, remember, Summoning Insight does run all year round, unlike the other shows. This is like Best Damn League show that's coming up in a day or two. That will end after this episode, the end of LEC. We'll keep running through Worlds and all year as usual. So there will still be plenty of time to get your questions answered. If you want to know how you ask them, you are a subscriber to our Discord, and then there is a channel. You can put the questions in. Problem solved.
Yeah, and especially Summoning Insight will be going on during the off season too, covering like all the roster stuff. We've taken breaks in the past, but this is ostensibly a real business now, so we need to keep some of our shows going year round, just to make sure we have that consistency. So let's keep going. We will, now that my moving time has mostly ended, we should be able to get through a lot more of these questions. What is the weirdest esports story you have heard that you can share publicly? I mean, there's so many, man.
The problem is the real weirdest ones probably can't be shared. So yeah, like let's think within context. What can you share? Like you have to pick something really crazy. Let me think. What would be some really out there shit? I mean, I'll give you a random one. I think this is weird. It's not like going to be number one, but it's not a bad one. When I used to work for SK Gaming back in like the early 2010s, right? At the time when StarCraft 2 was a huge game, because we had a guy called Minsik who worked within SK who was Korean, like ethnically Korean, but also like lived in Germany part of his life. So he's like a perfect go-between. We used to be able to get big Korean players. And so if people don't know, MC, the Korean Protoss player, the GSL player, he used to just play for us in SK Gaming as like our international player and won like IEM and all stuff. And so when he came to Germany one year, I think on this might be in France actually, ESWC. I think it was when he came to ESWC. He came to the event with us. And what you used to do was you would travel like Paris, where the ESWC was. The actual ESWC venue wasn't like in the center of Paris. It was in some like outskirts area that isn't technically even classed as Paris, I believe. So what you would do is you'd stay in some cheap hotel in Paris, then you'd go on the underground and the overground trains, and you'd go to this venue every day and then go to the event, right? When we were going on there, MC, if everyone's seen, just looks like the most like, he just looks like a stereotypical Korean, just a Korean nerd. He's got his SK jersey and everything on, and we all get on this train, and a pickpocket, like out of a movie, comes along and picks MC's pocket, like takes his wallet out of his pocket. So you'd think the story ends there, right? This is where it becomes a mad story. So the guy, apparently this is the move they do. He waits until the train's about to take off. He goes past MC, he pickpockets him, then quickly dives off the train as the doors are closing. So in theory, that's like the perfect getaway, right? Because, you know, the train leaves, then you've got because MC saw him do that, MC is so fucked in the head, because if you don't know, as a Korean, his actual personality was like mega outgoing. He was really extroverted.
Very, very fun. Yeah, very fun.
He sees this guy take the thing. So he chases him off the train, runs after this guy. The guy jumps onto a different train to escape. MC jumps through the doors of the other train. And then the guy's sort of like, he's never had this happen before. So the guy just turns around like, whoa, whoa. And then he just goes like, MC just turns to him and in fucked up broken English goes like, I kill you. And the guy just handed the wallet back. That's a real story. Because the joke was he himself was so, who the fuck is this guy? Like this crazy ass Korean guy chased me.
MC's big too. He's a big dude.
And said, I kill you. And then it's like, whoa, no problem. Just take the wallet back for like, okay, well, all right.
That's hilarious. MC's a pretty big guy too. So, you know, it might be somewhat intimidating if he came running at you. It's like extra funny because like MC, you can just tell he's Korean because in Korea, that dude like wouldn't have a knife or a gun, right? But you don't know what the fuck that guy could just shank you. Yeah. Just let the wallet go, you know.
No, by the way, that don't ever do that. That's terrible. Just let the fucking wallet go. Who gives a shit at that point?
It doesn't matter. Like who actually carries cash in the modern world? Like, what are they going to do? Just cancel your credit cards? Like, it's annoying, and you have to get like a new driver's license or whatever, new ID. But it's kind of whatever, right? All right, I'll share a different one about a pro player, and I'm going to not name who this was. And I'm going to let you know right now. Okay. Probably it's a very minor pro player that probably none of you have ever heard of. But this is just a pro player story in a nutshell. So I was told at one point in time by somebody when they recruited a younger pro player to their roster that this player had never been on an airplane before. Okay. And so they get on this airplane to go join the team. And because they had never been on the airplane, they didn't know there was a bathroom on the airplane.
Okay. So you're just holding it in for like 10 hours. Come on.
So this player actually just like straight shits themselves on the airplane. This is pro players for you guys.
Is this guy Amish or something? How does he not know that? Like what?
This is what happens when young men play video games for 14 hours a day and don't do anything else. And so that was the states in which maybe not like full on, but like a little bit. This player was then picked up by the team from the airport.
I've just realized technically, Monty, we can tell better stories if we just conceal the identity, like you say. So I've got one. You might even know who I'm referring to. But the key thing is that I won't give any details to it. They will never guess who I'm referring to. There was a player, and all I'll say is this. I'll give you one detail, but it's not enough. I'll just say he played in the LCS, so you'll know the stakes are legit. This player who played in the LCS was for real crazy. And I don't use that in a derogatory. I mean, for real, there was something wrong with this guy. Because one time, it's not a joke, before a game, he just sent to a rival player on the other team who was going to play him in LCS a picture of his own dick. And it just said, like, how you like that?
That's kind of great, actually.
But it's fucked up. I'm not joking, guys. I think he was trying to do it as some form of like intimidation or something, like, which is like,
I love it.
What? And that the key thing is, because I'm not going to tell you who it is, that's all you're going to get on that one. But that's pretty mad. And by the way, this player, like, again, I have to be careful what details I give. He was an actual professional player. Like, pretty sweet. You would know the name if I said it. I just won't tell you and I won't give you any clues. So I think that story's pretty mad. And that's one of those ones where, like, this is actually one of the sad things about esports in a way. We're actually not that much of a TMZ industry, Monty. Like, if you notice, these stories very rarely do actually get out, if you know what I mean. Like, part of you thinks, oh, that'll surely come out of the... They never do. If you notice, a lot of the really crazy ones sort of do stay internal. It's actually kind of mad.
Yeah, I think that's hilarious. What an alpha move.
That's so, yeah, but I think he was just mental, like I said. I think unfortunately he just lost the plot at that point in time. Like if that actually was some like next level mind game, yeah, that'd be pretty cool. But like I think he just lost the plot at this point.
That's actually hilarious. So there you go. Weird esports stories.
There you go.
We've talked about this for a long time, but I really do want Richard. Hopefully, you guys tweet at Richard and tell him you want this, but we've talked in the past about him doing like an esports one-on-one interview show on LFN where he just interviews like OG people in the scene and they tell the outrageous stories from 10 years ago that are beyond the statute of limitations now. Would be absolutely fucking fire podcast.
Oh, of course. Especially because Richard himself has built his persona a bit like I have, where like he can tell those stories and he can be in the story. It doesn't detract from the story. Like if Richard was told you a story where he was on cocaine with some famous player, like at 4 a.m. in a bender, that still sounds cool. Like it's not the end of the world because it's Richard Lewis. Like actually that can work with his persona. He would be the perfect host for that show for sure. Yeah. And he knows half the stories himself, you know?
Yeah. He probably appears in most of them. What are some of your favorite desserts you've experienced throughout your travels?
Oh, wait, I'll give you one more crazy story. Are you ready for one more crazy story? But again, I'll keep the players out of it, but it'll be fire. This one's insane, mate. When you hear this story, you will realize now why I think pro players are insanely overrated by fans in terms of things like intelligence, street smarts. It's like my rule goes. Most of them are just like a 14-year-old kid who's in the body of a 20-year-old adult who everyone thinks is responsible, but really you just spent all like 6 years playing video games and you never learned, right? I'll keep the names out of it again, Monty, but this one's mental. So during E-League, when we're in Atlanta, and by the way, the reason I thought of this one's because like the last one, I actually at the Richard Lewis status where I can be in the story doing the outrageous shit, but it doesn't matter because I'm Thorin, so I built it into my narrative. So you ready? When we were in E-League, right, there was a bunch of players. Obviously, we'd have all those European Counter-Strike players come over, wouldn't we, for like a month at a time. A bunch of them, when they're at the hotel, because even the talent for the first season was in the same hotel as the players, right? So we were all, every night after the show, everyone would go to this hotel bar. And what happened was a bunch of European players came to me at like 2 in the morning when the bar's closing at like 1 or whatever in America. And because they're all from Europe, they're all noobs and they don't know that like, well, that's it. Like everyone else is going to go to bed now, mate. Like that's it in Atlanta. They're all like, hey, Thorin, like, where can we go now? And I was like, now? It's like 2 minutes. Well, nothing's open. And they were like, oh, come on, there's got to be something open, like strip club, like nightclub. And I'm like, man, there's nobody a strip club you can go to if you want. And I said, but the problem there as well is like the one that's here, if this is a random detail, but because Atlanta, in each state in America, this is one of the few things they do run like America was supposed to do. Different states have different rules, etc. Right? One of the things is with strip clubs, there are different rules state to state as to what the rules are. So in Atlanta, for example, in theory, the rule is you're not actually allowed to touch the stripper at all. You're supposed to sit like this, literally, don't touch her at all with your hands. And she sort of dances. And in theory, Monty, she's not supposed to like properly touch you. She sort of dances like just off you in front of you, which I always thought already is like, why even have it be a strip, like a lap dance at that point? And if they're not touching you and not on you, like, what are we even doing at this? It's like I'm watching. And I may as well have like 3D glasses. Like, whoa, it's almost real. Like she's here. Like, so they're already doing that. So I basically try to tell these guys, you're not going to like it though. Like then I told them, like, if you go on like European strip club, this is going to be rubbish. And then they were like, oh, but I've heard about this one called Magic City, which is the really famous strip club in Atlanta that all the African American people go to, right? And essentially all the strippers, all the people who run the bar, and most of the clientele are African American. And all
it's also strippers are very famous in Atlanta. Like strip clubs are it's like the strip club city.
The name of this one is really famous with like NBA players and stuff, right? But when you go to this one, all I'll tell you is this, Monty. The rules did not apply at this one. When you go to this one, you weren't in the same state. In fact, at this one, it's so crazy. I took these bloody European players there like 3 a.m, remember? We're there at like 3 a.m. on like a Saturday or whatever. And in this one, they're even doing mad shit, like, because it's like maximum capacity, you can even like pay the woman and she just does like a weird lap dance while you're standing there like at the bar, like against you at the bar. And I remember thinking, like, what is this? But this is the punchline. Are you ready for the insane punchline? When you hear this story, you will know how utterly stupid pro players are in all esports games. So these top European Counter-Strike players, Monty, who've got me to go all the way to this club with them, I've taken them all the way there, right? This is not a joke. They do that. Like, we're all stood there and they're all going, it's fucking crazy. And then one of them goes like, oh, I'm going to get a dance. And he gets a woman like that while we're still there at the bar to come and do this weird dance against him. And while she's dancing, Monty, like, because he's thinking like he's living out his dream out of like a movie, like out of a rap video, he gets out a bunch of money, right, out of his wallet while she's doing the lap dance and starts doing that shit where you make it rain on dem hoes, like, you know, making like the money go like that. But here's where, this is like a Black Mirror episode, mate. This is where the second my eye, even though I'm by the way, guys, you think I'm not on a night out, I'm just trying to have a fucking drink and enjoy myself. But when I key in on this little detail, my nightmare begins, because I notice as he's throwing the money up, Monty, I notice he's throwing up Ukrainian hryvnia. And if you don't know, that is one of the lowest currencies in the world. As in, like, a few of these notes is literally like 1 cent. And he's throwing them on her back, Monty. And because in their country, they don't use coins. These are notes. So she's not, remember, she doesn't know it's Ukrainian hryvnia where it's falling on her back. She's thinking she's getting a minimum like dollars. Like, this is at least like 10, 50. If not, like, I'm guessing she probably thinks she's getting like, probably thinks she's getting like $300 from someone rich. And so I've now realized, right, so now I have to immediately extricate us from this bar, because if this woman notices what currency that is and tells the bouncer, and by the way, the bouncers all look like they just failed like a high school fucking like NFL team tryout or something. They're all
giant guys.
They're insane, mate. Like, you would never fuck with any. You'd pick all these people in Street Fighter 2 if they were a character, put it that way. They're all insane. I'm just thinking, if we don't get out of here ASAP and they realize you're basically like defrauding them of money, we're going to get our asses beaten. We're the only white boys in it as well, by the way. We're just going to get our asses beaten outside this nightclub in Atlanta. And the worst thing is, I've brought your motherfuckers here. Like, it's going to be like pinned on me as well, isn't it? So I had to just get these motherfuckers out there as fast as possible. That's into a cab, back to the hotel, and I just hope that woman, when she counted the money, just didn't think it was real money, because that was worth about $2 or something. Like, what a nightmare though, because the thing is, they're all, by the way, they all think it's funny as well, man. Like, lol, look at this, look what I'm doing. And I'm just thinking, I'm just visualizing that bouncer guy coming over and just fucking, you know, like I'm Tom Brady trying to get out the pocket, and he's just Aaron Donald coming in on my face, like, oh shit. Exactly. I kept all the names out there, but you can already see, guys, how ridiculous esports is.
By the way, that's a very funny story, but it's actually one of the more mild Counter-Strike
that
stories.
Crazy, was it? Oh.
Some of the Counter-Strike story guys are fucking wild. All right, what are some of your favorite desserts you've experienced throughout your travels?
See, the funny thing is, I do like desserts, but I'm actually a bit of a boomer. I like a lot of the old British, like I love crumbles and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah,
rhubarb crumble, banger, blackberry, blackberry pie, etc., that sort of thing. I like stuff like that.
I'm more of a pie guy personally.
Mad underrated pies.
I like the fruits and less of the like cakes and stuff.
I actually want to ask you that though. Why in America? Because you have the. Here's what I don't get, Monty. You have the pies, but you guys don't do it with the custard. Like, the custard is what you always have with a pie or a crumble. That's what what do you have in America? Cream or something? What do you do with it?
Ice cream usually, like vanilla ice cream. Right. Yeah, like a scoop of vanilla ice cream.
Custard's the go-to in the UK though, with like all that.
Right. Yeah, I've had all of that. I don't know. I mean, I'm from Mediterranean food. I'm a pretty big fan of baklava. I like all
That's pretty
the
good. Very
layers
sweet,
and
isn't
the
it? Yeah.
pistachios and that with the honey. I
I
think
think
that's
you
quite
must like a
nice.
creme brulee. That seems like
Oh
your
yeah,
sort of.
creme brulees. Yeah, creme brulee is good.
Seems like it's up
I'm
your
not a
alley.
big dessert fan. That's my problem. Is that I just don't. I don't really like sweet things very much. So it's not my go-to for sure.
The problem I have is, especially if I go to a restaurant, I never have desserts at restaurants. I don't know what I just have the entree basically. I have my main
Yeah.
course, whatever that is, and that's all I have. So I do like some of those things, but I'm not like a huge dessert guy in that sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Creme brulee
Yeah.
is pretty banging anywhere in the world, though. Always give that a try if you can.
What are some esports teams you compare to traditional sports teams in terms of brand history, fan culture, etc.? Basically, name some esports to sports team analogies. Preferably European football teams, although Monty is more comfortable with American sports teams. Yeah, I don't know fucking about anything about
that. Well, what we'll do is this then. Maybe you'll give like American and I'll try and do a European soccer equivalent to whatever name you give. We'll do that. I'll translate it. So pick one for like an American sport. Who are we going to go with?
I mean, I think TSM is like, you have to take, for TSM, you have to take a team that's in a like money spending, that's not in a salary cap. So it's like the Yankees, right?
Okay.
The Yankees have been traditionally very good at the top of Major League Baseball because they're in a big market and because there's no salary cap. They can basically continue to sign good players. But they also had like a star player for decades and Derek Jeter, right? So they have like a core group of players or a core player that they build around, but are consistently relevant, but also just super annoying because their fans show up to every game because they're so popular, even home games of other teams, and are just douches, even though obviously the market dynamics are entirely different where their fans come to your home team's games in a small market and just act like assholes, even though they're spending like 3 times as much money as your team and have inherent advantages. So I would say douchebag fan base, kind of annoying, spending a lot of money, have like, at the time would be like Bjergsen would be like Derek Jeter, right?
Okay. I mean, here's the thing. There's even another American angle he could have got. I also think TSM could have been the Dallas Cowboys. They won, but so long ago. Does it even really count anymore? Also, most obnoxious fans in the world. And then thirdly, every single time they have a vaguely good team, you manage to convince yourself they're going to win, don't you? But they don't ever. So problem solved with that one.
Meddling owner who may or may not understand the modern sport.
He keeps busting in the room, trying to tell everyone what to do. And secretly, he's the coach. Starting to line up in it here.
He's the GM.
Exactly.
Although they did absolutely destroy the Giants in one of the most one-sided games I've ever seen last night, 40-0. It was quite painful to watch if you hate the Cowboys / are a Giants fan. But yeah, they are very annoying. That's true though. The hype never lives up to the actual results. It's very true. The Cowboys.
And also, the reason why they're a good analogy to TSM, Monty, is they have that like insane sort of like reality skewing effect. Because the joke is, I even get drawn into it, like people do with TSM discussions when they had the good lineups. Like, almost every year, halfway through the season, part of me does think like, but on paper, they do have one of the best rosters. Maybe they could win the Super Bowl, actually. And then it's only every time that, like, first playoff game happens, you're like, oh, no, wait, what was I thinking about? Like, but you even get drawn into it yourself because they're billing it every season like they're the best, like TSM fans. Like, even you start having the debate, well, maybe they can go to semis and worlds this time and all that shit, Sort of reminds me of it. What about some other teams? Who else are we going with?
Do you have any European, like, football team analogies?
I mean, if we're going to do, like, TSM... The problem is, again, the fan aspect has to be a major part. That's why I also did the Cowboys and Yankees, because it's just intolerable fan bases, aren't they? Who essentially what makes those fan bases so shit is one, they really do talk like bro thinks he's on the team. And then two, they talk like their team's going to win everything forever and have a dynasty that lasts 1,000 years. So like they're always below the success. So I'm not sure who I would pick for that in terms of like European sports. Maybe like... probably should be something like Barcelona or something. Again, it's like a really good team. Historically, they don't have Messi anymore, but they used to have one mega player. Their fans are obnoxious and think they should just win everything all the time. Maybe that's the analogy.
I mean, I think another analogy would be like G2 for the Brady Belichick New England Patriots. Because what was so annoying about the Patriots is like because Tom Brady and Bill Belichick were there, and yeah, I know Dylan Falco hasn't been there the entire time, and they've had different coaches, but Grabs was also a very successful coach during the peak of, I mean, the question is, did G2 ever not have a peak? They continue to win, but it's like as long as the Patriots had Brady and as long as G2 had Caps, it really didn't matter what other players they were plugging in, and they would do a good job of finding rookie players, or they would attract veteran players to come to their rosters, and they would do things that, you know, plays or roster moves that wouldn't make sense, like moving Perks into the AD carry role to bring on Caps, right? And they would take these risks. The Patriots are very famous for having really creative and versatile, like play calling. And you can see that too, still to the current day, in terms of the versatility of G2 and their willingness to experiment in the meta. You know, Patriots have been classically, like, you know, done things from, you know, when they beat the Rams in the Super Bowl a few years ago, and they like moved back to like an old form of defense that hadn't been used in decades in order to slow down the Rams passing attack. And it was just an innovation for the kind of playoffs and the Super Bowl that they were utilizing. So they're veteran enough to like pull things out of the past to surprise people, which reminds me a lot of G2 as well. And the other thing is they just keep fucking winning. It just like nothing can slow them down. They win more and more titles. It's just like it doesn't appear to matter. Like if they have a slump, they always get it back together in time to actually win the title. You think they're starting to fall off a cliff? Nope, they've got another title now. They come back. So.
Yeah, by the way, as a random aside, I actually do think, the more I've watched of the NFL, that is a mad underrated part of Bill Belichick's approach. Haven't you noticed how the other coaches, bro, really do treat it like just some idiot making a fancy football team? Like, right, I want the best quarterback and then the best wide receiver, and then and they just do like the obvious positions, right? Have you not noticed how Bill Belichick conveniently goes for all the like angles? Like, first of all, is it a coincidence he had like maybe the two best fucking kickers to ever play in the NFL in his team? I don't think it is, because I think he cares about things like field position. And then, like, think about that guy he had, mate, that Matthew Slater guy for like special teams. Like, Bill Belichick actually cares about all the like weird side things that are afterthoughts to the other teams. Like, it's why, in my opinion, the floor of his teams is crazy. You even see it with the squads now, mate. They don't have like the players to actually be the best, but the floors, they're always going to be like a playoff team, basically. They're ridiculous, aren't they?
Yeah. So
because again, it's like you say, it's G2 ever bad? Isn't like the joke is the worst position was they came second to Rogue last year. That's it, and then they lost to Mad now. But like, essentially, like they are like top two's perma for like 7 years or something mad, aren't they? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, and also like it was ridiculous that the Patriots were able to be so good over a 20-year period and win six. You know, winning 6 Super Bowls in 20 years is insane success in the NFL and in a system that is salary capped. It's never going to happen again. Basically,
it's actually insane. Let's move on anyway.
All right, let's move on. Let's see here. Oh, I scrolled too far down. Hold on. Do you guys have any pets? Kinds, ages, names? If not, do you want pets? Yeah, I have 2 cats. I'm still going to answer
this. I keep personal things out secret. It's all good.
I have 2 cats. One of them is named Stella, and she was a stray that we picked up in Korea off the street. And we don't know how old she is. She's like 12. And we have one named Astro, who was born on the streets of LA, who's 4 now. So we have 2 cats. Okay. People always talk about what would happen if all Koreans just stayed in Korea. How much stronger do you think EU would be if they never imported players to LCS? Would the concentration of talent plus not having to worry about the best players being poached by NA have made a significant enough difference over the last 10 years for EU to be meaningfully more competitive with Asian teams? No, Bjergsen, Jensen, Sven, Froggen, Febevin, Svenskeren, Perks, Alfari, Hansama. I mean, yes. I think that's kind of that's not controversial. Like, if all the Koreans were still in LCK, it would be better league than LPL, and Korea would be the dominant region. Think about how many Korean players have won world titles on Chinese teams, right? There haven't been any Chinese players winning world titles or big titles on Korean teams. Like, they don't have to import players in order to be competitive with the best teams in the world. And similarly, if all those players you listed had stayed in Europe, I think Europe would have, I mean, Bjergsen being in Europe and Jensen being in Europe are probably the biggest two, that had they been there, they would have made a strong mid-lane European pool during that time period even more powerful, and they could have probably formed super teams within those regions.
Remember, there's a world, if you think of the timeline, where you would actually at the exact same time have had all these players in their peaks. Caps, Bjergsen, Jensen, Perks, all these players at the same time, Nuke Doc, Power of Evil. I won't put Froggen, obviously he's a bit older at that point in time. Like, you know, I had an insane mid lane pool, a fucking insane mid lane pool. And then think about even some of the names people forget about. Sven and Mithy moved when they're at their peak in Europe, when they were the bot lane that was the best in the West. If they never leave, mate, there's another flaw razor right there. If you have the best in the West bot lane, you're at minimum going to be top forged every single split. Like, in fact, there's even one that I talked about in my interview with like Carlos and Sven that people don't know. You know that when Sven and Mithy left to go to TSM for like season 8, at the time, the counter offer was from G2. And basically, G2 already knew they were going to get the top side of the map. They already did of Wunder and Jankos. So they actually, in Season 8, could have had a super team, which would have been Wunder, Jankos, Perks, Sven and Mithy. They already could have had a different super team and gone for a world. Like, think about that squad competing against the Fnatic team that went to the Worlds. That would be an amazing year. So the difference is, to me, it's why it's a good question. Just like Korea, inarguably, would just be way better with all those players staying in. Europe, obviously, would be way better. The key thing, I think, is this, though. China wouldn't have been as good, Monty, but there always were the Zhao Hus and the amazing Uzi Eyes and Knights of the world. Here's the difference. The real angle people aren't thinking about is what the fucking LCS would be like without the imports, mate. Holy shit, would the LCS be bad without European imports? Can you imagine? Oh, yeah. Bro, it would just be double lift. It would be like, here's the real joke. People haven't thought this through. If you don't bring over Jensen and fucking all these players talking about Bjergsen, you know, at this point in time, like fucking Poor Belter would be like a contender for like NA GOAT. Because who would his competition be? Poor Belter for real would have just stacked rings. He actually, like, no joke, would be like every world. So why wouldn't he? Think of who he'd be playing against. He'd be playing against like fucking who?
Yeah.
Who he when he was mid lane? Like, what are we talking about here? Golden glue, bro. The real question is, fuck Europe. How bad would NA be without European input? It'd be really bad. Really bad.
I mean, I'm down for that. I would much rather have a more competitive Europe and Korea.
I would as well.
Frankly.
Like I said, the problem I have is it's always the what if. Like, it kills me that we'll never know what Jensen and Bjergsen would have been like at least a year in Europe on a proper team, you know, not when they're rookies. I think it does suck that, like, Rookie and fucking the Shy just did their whole careers in China almost. Like, come on, I can't have like 2 years. Like, here's the problem I have. I always hoped that it would be like that super team that KT made. Then eventually everyone would come back just a few years later, you know, that you'd always do a couple of years at the end and you retire. The sad thing is, it looks like Rookie and the Shy's never coming back, mate. Doimby's never coming.
It actually sucks because if Rookie came back to LCK next year, he probably could make Worlds through LCK.
Yeah, why not?
But he just keeps getting cucked in China.
If we just take him, no joke, if we just take him and put him, this is the only change I make, just put him onto Hanwha Live. Dude, they're right in the mix. What are we talking about? They'd be mega.
Well, it's just getting depressing. If you were the GM of an NA team, in what order are you picking the following junglers in their prime year? So in their top year. This is actually a good question. Meteos, I'll copy this for you. Meteos, I will dominate. Xmithy, Svenskeren, and Reignover, assuming Reignover does not take an import slot. Okay.
So basically, we're going off their best year.
Mm-hmm. I think I'd probably take Reignover first, considering that the level of dominance he and Huni had when they came over on Immortals, even though they didn't actually end up winning that split, was pretty impressive. You know, especially the year he played on Fnatic 2 was really, really strong. So I think in terms of peak, I probably take him first. I just think I just take Xmithy because he was so ridiculously consistent over the course of his career that he could be counted on to, you know, kind of build a roster around for a long time. I think I then take Svenskeren, who had a pretty good peak. And then I think I will dominate. And I think I take Meteos last. And the reason why I think I take Meteos last is because building rosters around a carry jungler who took up so much, the amount of resources he took up when he was at his peak requires you to have some, that Cloud9 roster was kind of weird. It worked, but it worked because of the players, like they assembled the right group of players around Meteos. And I think it's really hard to plug in like 2013 Meteos into a variety of rosters if you're trying to build something for the long term.
The thing is, if I do this, I can immediately just say Dom is last. That's not a diss to him. I have to pick the best year of these players. Like, there's years where Dom was better than these people, but the problem he has is his absolute best year. Like, these are some of the best junglers ever from the Western region, so he has to come last. I would probably do first Sven Skaren, because I actually think in Europe he was fucking cracked before he came to TSM, mate. Like, when he used to play on that SK gaming team, he was really good. Like, he would just straight up fuck you up duelist style, mate, and just beat the other junglers straight up. And his mechanics are really good. I'll give Reyno number 2. My consideration with Reyno is I only saw him do it with Huni, so I can't really know how good he is on his own. But fair enough, he was mega the Fnatic and the Immortals, yeah, like you say, basically revolutionised jungle. Then I'd go with Smithy, mainly because, actually, of these names, he's pretty good internationally. He's had some pretty good results. I always thought he held up well. And then the Meteos one, the only problem is, I know what you mean. Essentially, there's a reason why a lot of teams haven't worked with Meteos. He seems like he's a guy that, like, to me, he has like some Dennis Rodman factor where, like, you have to sort of cater to him a little bit and sort of like let him be a little bit cheeky in a way other people can't. But I do think he is an unbelievable player. Like, I actually think Meteos is underrated. I think he did have a brilliant mind for the game.
Look, man, it's not about saying his peak year was bad. It's just, as a GM, like, it's hard to slot him in reliably to a team.
Yes.
Monty and Thorin have been abducted by aliens. The aliens agree to release them on the condition that they can convince them of a specific league narrative. If their arguments aren't compelling enough, they will be probed and dissected. Monty must convince them that Bengi is the greatest jungler of all time, and Thorin must convince them that Reckless is the greatest Western player of all time. What are your answers? Mine's actually easier. I think you could make a very strong argument for Bengi that says, first off, you make the dumbass argument, which is that he has 3 world titles, right? And then what you do is you start skewing the narrative like this. You say, he didn't ever have to play carry junglers because his job was just, the job of a jungler is to facilitate the most powerful position on the map, which is the mid lane position, which is the position that is capable of individually carrying the hardest. So truly, to be the greatest jungler, all you want to do is power up your mid laner, who can then roam on the map and take over team fights and win the mid lane and provide you the most map control. In order to provide that map control, you should be playing more supportive style junglers and focusing on pathing and warding, which he did, as you can see from his famous Nunu games. And in fact, it is a trap of junglers to try and carry themselves, which is why he didn't play Nidalee in professional games. But another reason why he's the greatest is his first professional game of Nidalee was an accident, right? And even then he stepped up playing jungle the wrong way, the carry way. And that is why he is the greatest jungler of all time, because he was able to actually sublimate his own ego and make sure that Faker, who is the best player in the world, because we're not arguing Bengi is the greatest player, we're arguing he's the greatest jungler, and that his job as a jungler was to enable Faker, the greatest player.
I mean, the problem is, obviously, this is like a flawed premise, because you're actually asking as though we have to like argue legit that the person is, but we obviously don't agree with that. So I'm just going to do the same thing Monty did. You just take factors I wouldn't pick. But obviously I would say on Earth, a lot of humans like to go by your resume and your accomplishments. And so in that sense, Reckless is the best, isn't he? Because he was the best at his role in season 4, season 7, season 8, arguably season 11. Right. First of all, that's amazing. 4 years with the best. Secondly, longevity is amazing. No one can compare. If you go and look at like titles, he doesn't have the most titles, but he has won the title a number of times in different eras. He has, I'm going to guess, the most MVPs, probably the most all-pro rankings. He's been in the World's Finals. He's been in the World Semi-Final. He's been in the World's Playoffs many, many times. He's been to MSI a bunch. Essentially, if you just go by how plebs rank them, on paper, he could be the best. And he's also good looking.
and he has...
We're just to some people. You know?
And he has the flexibility to switch roles now, right? And isn't that, if he's the greatest Western player of all time, then surely his support, now that he's moved to support, he should be able to flourish in this new role as well and return to the peak of competition.
And he has the flexibility to switch up on people who made him anytime he feels like it, like Fnatic and checks notes Fnatic. On the third side, Fnatic. There you go.
Is there any chance we get a top 20 players at Worlds LFN edition before World starts? Yes. We'll do top 10 on Power Spike right before Worlds. Since signing up for LFN Discord for the low price of only $6.99 per month, I've received great joy from having my questions successfully make Monty chuckle while simultaneously make Thorin nod and say, okay. Alien Esports Relics, Senator McConnell's lag out. That was a funny question. Barbenheimer Esports. What are your favorite stories from the desk where you were on the verge of laughter but had to keep a straight face? You don't have to keep a straight face. That's the thing. You just laugh and have a good time. So I don't know if I had one where I was like intentionally not laughing, because I'm just the kind of asshole who would just laugh regardless of the situation. Like if somebody says something dumb or ridiculous, that's why you guys liked me on the desk, was because people don't get away with bullshit. I just laugh at them to their face or make fun of them. So I don't know. You're not the kind of person who keeps a straight face on the desk either.
But he's asking for like a time when something happened and like we sort of like did a poker face, but we secretly won't burst out laughing or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't really know on that one. Because as you say, like, especially on Siesta, so you can just react, can't you? It's not a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not having to be a sort of buttoned up. So I'm trying to think if that really even happened.
Yeah, I never really, I feel like have done that. That's part of it. You want that authenticity of like having a good time in the moment. So I don't know why you would hold back. And
I would say the only scenario I can think of that would fit is more like, you know, when people do that childish thing where like there's an in-joke and people are trying to like work it into the broadcast, or like, you know, the sort of thing where you're never going to explain it, but it's like for the other people. Like, but it's, so that's like the sort of thing where people know his personality. That's the sort of thing that like Henry G loves to do, where like he'll make a joke that to you, you're like, well, it's not that funny a joke, but he's like purposely referencing something outrageous that he was talking about in the green room, like before the game, or some shit that happened to him last night. Like, I'll give you one. There was one like that where I won't say the player name, because I realized actually this is the secret to tell all the stories. You don't say the player name or give any clues. There was a player, Monty, a few years back, I'll keep it vague like that, where, no joke, the day before I had to talk about a bunch of the games he was doing in the tournament, I saw him myself leave the bar where all the people are meeting at each day for after the event. He just left the bar with two, let's just say, women who work in esports, and he went off, and the story is he had a threesome with them that night, right? And the next day he came, and he came to the venue and started playing this match, and you could even see on his face, Monty, he looked like he'd aged 10 years, right? So he's gone, he's had this threesome, and I'm not joking, because you're going to think I'm trolling when I say this. In the game, inexplicably, he keeps winning clutch rounds like 1v2s and 1v3s. And so you can imagine I was just making all of my analysis about how good, you know, how he can be on his own, he's backed up, it's 1 versus 2. After the first kill, there's high expectation. You know, I was doing all these jokes, but obviously we'll never explicitly saying, because no one even knows what's really going on. But like me, I think me, Richard, a few people, we were making as many ridiculous references. So and as you do it, you're obviously trying to keep a poker face, even though the person you're talking to knows clearly what you're like angling at and what you're referencing. And so it's almost like you're trying to make them laugh, because you know we're not allowed to say what's really going on. So there's one. If I keep it secret, it's all good. It's all good.
Is Thorin the most powerful figure in esports?
Seems like it, right?
He says, a known misogynist, yet not a single woman he worked with or is currently working with has come out and spoke against him. Under his tyranny, no doubt. This level of silence couldn't even have been achieved by Riot.
To be fair, technically, Frostgorin has come out and said I'm a misogynist, so that's not totally true. But then again, she also did wait about 6 years to do it as well. So that didn't necessarily seem in good faith necessarily on that one.
Well, also every claim that she's made of people being bigoted has never been backed up by any actual stories or evidence. Turns out so. This was, of course, by our good friend, architect of Korean esports based Joe Marsh.
By the way, the reason I low-key, though, do sometimes feel like I am the most powerful person in esports, it's like the line that Richard said in the Substack article he did like yesterday or whatever, where he just said that like he feels like he has some bizarre like cursed power, because people, just in the hopes of trying to prove him wrong, will seemingly give up like every principle they ever claimed to stand for. It's so weird, isn't it, when they do that? You know, when they do like the weird gotcha on like people like me and Richard, you're like, is this necessary? Like, you guys essentially like, huh? Oh, in that case, maybe I do like, checks notes, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Like, you know what I mean? Like, guys, who are you picking? Just to be against us, you will actually go on the side of anyone. Like, what?
I think it's impressive that you guys just mind control people so thoroughly that they abandon all their morals just in order to like dunk on you on Twitter. It's wild. It's wild.
For some reason, it's not as well. You're right as well. It's also specifically the Twitter dunk. That is the flame from which these moths can't help but just dive in, isn't it? Like they must get I must get the ratio.
You notice they never actually come on shows and debate their ideas. Of course not. They never ask. They're never like, hey, let me, because we'd let them on, by the way, guys. We don't give a shit. Yeah. Like they will lose in that environment, and they know they will lose in that arena, and all their stupid opinions will be undoubtedly exposed. By the way, architect of Korean esports base Joe, you may be having to change your name soon. I think our guy Joe Marsh is on the way out of T1 right now.
Oh no! By the way, I'll just tell everyone right now, I'm enough of a prick that if he leaves this year and they don't win Worlds, looking pretty safe right now, I will just do a video about how I'll show what it was like before he joined, like overwhelming success, trophies, and then I'll show during his era, because it's like 3 LCK titles or something. Like that's it. That's it. Like that's all you get. And spoiler, it's also all of his LCK titles, minus that one last year, are just when the other teams are perennial chokers like Genji, Griffin. Like this guy, it's actually almost impressive how little success he actually got in T1. It's kind of crazy. And by the way, his era also was some pretty stacked lineups too. He had some pretty good players.
Yeah, and like I said about Joe, he is annoying, but I actually think that he has been what he has advocated for in LCK, I think, has been quite good. He's just annoying on social media. Okay. But I don't think he's a bad person. If you had an upcoming speech/lecture to a room full of people, TED Talk style, what topic would you choose? I mean, I think I would just talk about the state of the esports industry and the state of esports winter right now and explain why things are the way they are and what the future of esports might be. Because I think that I really care about esports. And I think that the systemic problems that have been created and been stacking over the years in terms of the business model are things that really need to be addressed and need to be brought to light.
I mean, technically, I have already done this. Like, I've done a talk about like esports journalism, for example, and how it developed over the year. When I would have sent, by the way, even then, I'll just throw this in there. I had that's an example of something that was like I did over the years. I've never told this story though, and because they never did put a video of that online. If you remember, they did like a weird Periscope of those talks, Monty, but I don't think they ever put them on YouTube. So sadly, you can't just go and watch it. At the beginning, I did like a mad edgy joke. You might not remember this, where in the crowd, right in front of me, there was just a guy who had insanely dyed blonde hair just sat right in front of me. And by the way, this is only a few years ago, guys, like 2019 or something. So at the beginning of my speech, which I've got all prepared, I saw that guy and I just freestyled and I was like, oh, nice to see Marlo Yiannopoulos has come to the speech or whatever. And I remember afterwards, like Richard or someone be like, why are you bloody doing that? You know, this campus wouldn't appreciate him, like, and I was like, well, I didn't think that, did I? It was just a fucking light-hearted joke. Like, that's a pretty good one. So basically, I know what I would do the speech on, actually. Because essentially, by the way, in a sad world, the sad reality is this, Monty. I actually sort of wish this did exist for esports. I wish there was like a legit conference, not one of the scam ones like all the other ones where it's all the LinkedIn grifters all going and people like Nicole Jameson, like, what do we need with the media landscape? I don't want those ones. I want like real ones where it actually is veterans giving like sort of like State of the Union type talk like you're talking to the industry. Because I tell you what I would love to do a speech about. My speech would just be about this topic of virtue signaling, but then who the money's coming from. And what I would essentially say the gist of it is if we go back to the beginning of esports, it's just about the games, isn't it? It's about putting on really awesome tournaments. So essentially, I would even say, like, realistically in esports, unless you're going to take really hard moral stances, and everyone's proven they are not going to, why don't we go the other way around? Why don't make it so that when you're in esports, it's not about your politics. You do the gig, you do the games, you get your money. If you want, by the way, after that, go on some Robin Hood shit. Steal the money from the scumbag industry and give it to whatever cause you want. But don't lead with the cause, because as we've seen, none of you have that cause. You don't believe in it. You're not willing to put yourself behind these things. And in doing so, I actually think we just muddy the messaging of what esports is. Like, esports isn't some big, like, political spectacle. If anything, that's a very small side thing that you might happen to, like, for example, I would like it like this. Here's how I want people to find out about politics. It's more like if I'm a huge fan of Bjergsen and I read every Bjergsen interview and vlog, and he happens to mention, oh, by the way, I'm interested in this, but then maybe I'm interested. I don't want him, like, in my face with it before I even bloody know Bjergsen is, you know what I mean? Like, that's obnoxious. So I think just the industry in general, we've got to resolve that issue, because at the moment, like, we're just a shit version of politics where everyone claims to believe X and then doesn't do it for the money, like, that's just rubbish.
How are we supposed to know immediately who to like and who to not like unless we reveal all of our political opinions up front, Thorin? Exactly. How are we supposed to know, who's acceptable? It's outrageous. What world championship win made you the most happy for a certain player, such as 2022 made you happy for Deft? It did make me very happy for Deft.
That's true.
Who winning this year would make you the most happy? Well, for me, it's obviously Score, coach of Gen G, who never got to win a Worlds title as a player and who suffered from an insanely long drought of not even making Worlds for a long time, and also, not even winning a domestic title. And I'm very happy that as a coach, he's currently won 3 of his 4 splits, and including 3 in a row. But having Score win, even though it's not a player, also Chovy, that's fun, and Peanut, those are fun. But that would be for Score.
I think the 2 that stand out to me would be Matter with Samsung White, just because I think if that player had never won Worlds, the joke is actually that he makes the Worlds trophy less prestigious. That is one of the all-time, like, if people don't know, you could already tell from the eye test, like, this is one of the best players to ever play League of Legends. Like, here's the joke. When people did the counter argument to you earlier this year, like Dom, of like a support player can't be the best player for Carrier, for example. I understand why he means that, and like, obviously it can't 1v9 the game. The way that actually in this era, Matter played like with the jungler and on the map and played stuff like Thresh. He actually low-key like almost could 1v9. Like, he was actually that fucking like outrageously impactful on the map, the game, the shot calling, the lane. Oh, I thought he was mega. And then the other one for me is when ADG won a couple of years ago, so when Scout actually won Worlds. Like, I think that's like one of the more, I'm going to do a bunch of content now, don't worry. I think that's one of the most slept on storylines ever. The guy who was the protege of Faker went to another region and won the world championship. Like, that's a pretty big, and by the way, he's a many-time MVP champion. Like, I think he has a fucking baller career. He's just got the most slept on resume of all time, mate. He's like actually got an unbelievable career resume. So I thought that, even though it's not like he played his best ever league, I just thought he was always a very good player and he never got his plaudits before that,
That's fair. You have a player this year that would make you the most happy for winning? Knight, probably. You love Knight.
Yeah. Mainly just because he's never had the deep Worlds run. Like, I know you made that one semi, but no one gives a shit about that. Like, this is the player where it's not an exaggeration. Those of us who watched the LPL, this was like the best player for the last 4 years. So I hope he actually can deliver now and hit the highest heights. Yeah, that'll be very satisfying, I think.
What are some movies or books with the best dialogue?
Ooh, dialogue.
Yeah, it actually threw me for a second because I have to think about
That's tricky because the problem is normally when you think of dialogue, you think more like movies and stuff. But books is going to be hard though. Books with dialogue. That's tricky, actually.
I mean, the obvious answer is just Shakespeare because it's all dialogue. I mean, there is no better dialogue than Shakespeare.
I'm trying to think what books I've ever read that I really enjoyed the dialogue in. Oh, I mean, it's a bit of an immature answer, but I actually do think like the Discworld books have pretty good dialogue.
Well, that's
Some of those characters are pretty cool back. Yeah, exactly. The riposts and the sort of like the jokes and stuff are pretty good. I'm mainly thinking about, the guards ones and stuff like that. Those are the bagger ones.
Yeah, the problem is that when I think about dialogue, I just think about plays for the most part because that's really the entirety of a play, right? In terms of, and here's the other weird thing, is a lot of the books that I really like are more narrative or atmospheric. I wouldn't say that a lot of the authors and books that I really hold up there have the best dialogue because so much of the meaning behind them is thematic or in descriptions or, the thing, I love Cormac McCarthy, but the thing about Cormac McCarthy is it's not dialogues, it's like monologues, right? That these characters give. So I actually just, now that you asked this question, I just don't think I don't think dialogue is the most important thing that I think about when I think about fiction in novels. Now, on the side of movies,
one for me that stands out, a lot of people actually complain about his dialogue. I think it's mega. I like David Mamet movies. And
he's a playwright, so
if you don't know his dialogue, what some people don't like is he essentially does that thing where like it's a bit like Aaron Sorkin. The dialogue's too
Aaron
smart.
Sorkin's a very good one.
Like no one could actually write that way because essentially, like it's like I'm essentially coming up with the perfect riposte to what you said 1 second after you said it.
Yeah.
Before I've time. But when it's done well, it's really good. Like I think Mamet dialogue is mega in his movies. Like again, all the characters fit together. It's smart. It's witty.
Yeah, he's also a playwright, so it makes sense. Like he relies on dialogue first and foremost. I think Aaron Sorkin is a super good example. I think Charlie Kaufman is a really good example of dialogue. So yeah, that's I guess those would be the ones that I would pick.
Yeah, there you go.
Some of Tom Stoppard's films, but he's also a playwright. So there's a lot of playwrights that do well, I think, in the dialogue space in film. I've been looking into Swiss a bit, and combined with the mention of ranking all the teams, it's not fully clear how the ranking of teams affects the opponent's selection within each round. Has it been mentioned? In round 1, does rank 1 play 16, 2 versus 15? That's how it's supposed to work,
In theory, yeah.
And in round 2, assuming all the higher ranked team won, this ranked 1 then play rank 8. Yes, that's how it's supposed to work.
The problem becomes things like what happens when there's an upset. Does the underdog take the seed of the upper seed? Or, you know what I mean? That's where the questions come in.
Yeah.
And but it depends on what system you use. Like the original Swiss, when we first started using it, counter used to just be random, literally. So if you could actually just have like a really unlucky set of matches and a bunch of bombs, a 2-0 and really good teams, a 0-2, because just played the best teams and the worst teams. Can happen.
Yeah. And also I assume the way they're doing it is like China for, but actually, because I don't know how they're going to do this, because obviously China won MSI, but Korea won Worlds. So which do they, I guess they use the most recent one. So China #1 is probably the first seed, and then Korea #1 is probably the second seed. But the question is like, then is China #2, the third seed, et cetera, down the, when do you insert,
right?
Yeah. When do you insert Europe 1 seed? Is that like the fifth or sixth seeds? Yeah, it might be third.
If we know Riot, that's the way historically they do it, right?
So, and then NA is #4. NA first seed is #4.
So
it is NRG the 4th seed in Swiss at Worlds, because that is insanity. That is just insane.
Just think about it. Like logically, if they're the 4th seed, Monty, then they'd play what, the 13th team or something?
Mm-hmm.
That's like Vietnam or something, or like fucking Australia or something. Like they would be 1-0 just because of your silly system of seeding.
Yeah,
you know.
Even though NRG is literally worse than all 8 of the Korean and Chinese teams that are going. That's crazy. That's why it's going to be bad. Okay. Question for Monty. I just started Muay Thai and I'm loving it. Any tips for when you're the one holding the punching blocks? I assume you mean Thai pads. And yes, first off, that is a skill that you should be practicing, because it will make good people who can teach you things actually want to partner with you, because it's very annoying when somebody is bad at holding the Thai pads. What I would say is, remember that you are trying to simulate them punching you in the face. So if you have the pads out on the sides, no one's actually going to throw a jab over here. So you want to hold them in a way, if you're doing jab cross, where you kind of are alternating. The purpose is not to stand there like a fucking statue that somebody is punching. I can just punch a punching bag, except I can punch it in the middle that way. You have to move as well and anticipate the hits. If you're actually trying to get somebody to throw a proper hook, you want to hold it kind of in front of your face to simulate them hitting you in the head, right? Also, when people are kicking, you need to move so that they can get the right angle. So for example, if somebody is going to be kicking, you need to take a slight step to the side and hold like this, right? So that they would actually be, you put the pads in the place where your ribs would be, but you have to move in order for that to happen. Otherwise, you are just creating scenarios where people have bad form because they're kicking or punching in the wrong locations, and it fucking sucks, and it's really annoying. And good pad holding is a really legit skill. And like I said, it will make you better yourself, but you need to treat it like a skill that you are also learning. Otherwise, it's just really, really annoying for the person who is practicing with you. And I hate people who can't hold pads properly. And I literally will just stop them and be like, I need you to hold this here, and I need you to hold this here, because otherwise this is actually just useless training for me. So it's a pet peeve of mine for sure, but do it right. And just remember that you need to put them in a place where they would actually be punching or kicking as if they weren't there. The other thing I would say is that when you're holding, this is like a noob mistake, the handle at the back of the Thai pad, do not wrap your thumb around the bottom of the handle. Your thumb should be on top, because if somebody kicks you hard enough and the pad twists, you can break your thumb. So don't do that. That's stupid. What's happening first? A Saudi team in LEC or Champions League? Ooh, interesting question. I think we're pretty close to a team in LEC, I would imagine. I mean, that could have already happened, by the way. It already, I don't know if it was a Saudi team.
It was a Falcons team.
Oh, okay, that's a Saudi team. I didn't know if they were, Qatari or from the UAE, but it was a Saudi team. I think it's pretty likely to happen soon, guys.
I think so.
especially with the reports of like what's happening with Koi, there are going to be people with money who want to put money in, and Riot denied the Falcons team the opportunity to buy in, which is also just really shitty for the LCS or LEC teams that want to sell.
Yep.
That Riot's like vetoing that. So I would say it's probably coming somewhat soon.
That seems like an obvious thing to do as well.
Also in Champions League, I imagine as soon as they get enough good players playing domestically in Saudi Arabia, which doesn't seem to be a problem with like the billion-dollar contracts they're throwing around, it's only a matter of time. But I think it's going to take longer in Champions League because you kind of have to get the players there first, whereas a Saudi team could literally just buy an LEC slot from like Koi and it would be done, right? It would just be a done deal. Also, you could kind of argue probably
I think he means a Super League, not Champions League. He means like what a Super League or a Saudi team. That would be my guess.
I mean, couldn't you already make I would imagine that doesn't the Saudi Arabian government already own like Premier League teams? Isn't that true? So don't they technically already own a Champions League team?
I mean, sort of, but I don't really think I really count. I just assume he meant, which is more likely, that the LEC can buy in, Saudi buys into that, other than we make their own Super League, is what I think he meant.
Okay.
That's my guess. Because logically LEC is Champions League. It's all the best teams. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I don't get what he meant by that question otherwise, but whatever. Next question.
Do you think the Middle Eastern countries that are doing sports washing have clear goals in mind, or are they following the dictator's playbook without really understanding it? Are there masterminds behind the scenes or clueless people with more money than they know what to do
One thing I will say that I think is constantly misunderstood about this play, Monty, is the notion that they're only doing it for sports washing reasons. Like, one of the main let's be real, people will know, as we've talked about on past episodes, it's not just European soccer and golf and all these different sports. The real reason why Saudi Arabia and that region is so heavily putting all their money elsewhere is because right now, politically, you're supposed to believe oil is a bad thing and that everyone in the world should move off using cars and jets using oil. Therefore, their whole sector of energy is going to be like fucked, isn't it? Like, in theory, people won't be buying from them. So the premise goes, while they have all the money now, they're trying to pivot into all these other industries. Yep. And that's why, if you notice, to me, it's not even as much at the moment in esports like it is sports washing. Like, they could, if they wanted to sports wash, Monty, they could just overtly make you, when you're at an event in Saudi Arabia, actually say you're against gay stuff and stuff like that. Would be sports washing to me. I think actually what they're trying to do is more like, you notice the main goal seems to be just to get all these investments to eventually one day be at events in their region. That seems like the main goal, and that ties into things like Neom and that like city that the city they're making where it's like a big line along the fucking coast or whatever. Basically, those, and Dubai obviously was this. What they're trying to also do is make their region a massive tourist destination in the world. So they're trying to, sports is a great reason because obviously, like, I think of Vegas for like UFC, it's a place you go to for the sport, but then it becomes a tourism place on its own. So I think that's also a massive part that people are missing, is like they're going into all these sort of entertainment and cool areas. Notice for us Westerners, like Formula One, golf, esports, and what they want it to do is that in the future, the finals of Worlds and TI and the golf, and it's all just there in their country, and that's a reason to go there. So that's a weird angle, because I don't think people have thought that through yet. Essentially, they actually low-key want you, the fan, to one day go to Saudi Arabia, their country. You know?
Yeah, and also it's just a matter of buying low right now in esports winter. Here's the thing:
perfect time to buy.
Esports isn't going away. It's only going to continue to grow in popularity. Now, the games we have to date might not grow, but on a long enough timeline, if you have established an industry and you have a bunch of people working for you that are experts, this is why buying ESL and Faceit makes sense for them. Because if you're making a 10-year play, you will see money eventually from this, and you can spend your way. You can buy low, right? And they didn't buy ESL and Faceit low, by the way. They kind of bought them high, but they can buy other things low right now. They can buy other things low. And you can actually, while everyone else is desperate for money, it gives you, when no sponsors are around and VC has dried up, they've just replaced VC. So now people are desperate for money, and they can provide the money, and they can control more and more of the industry, which will be growing as we go down the years. So I think it's smart for them to invest right now, frankly. So I think, there is truth to the sports washing thing. That is a goal, but also you just have to view it as, in 10 or 20 years, they want to be a hub of a massive industry, which is probably the bigger goal, if we're being honest. But it is hard to separate those goals to a certain degree. Who do you think is weaker, the '06 TSM team who came back from the losers bracket with all 5-game series, or this NRG? Probably that '06 TSM team.
What losers bracket is he talking about?
So in the playoffs, they got knocked into the losers bracket by Golden Guardians, and then like took all 5 games to like win the title that year in LCS, and then they went 0-6 at Worlds.
Oh right, I got confused. I thought you meant like 2016, right? You mean the 2010 one, the one with double lifting Bjergsen online, right? Okay. So it was the one that had the dog shit Worlds with this 10-man sleep or whatever it was. Yeah.
And versus but also it was that team that kept fraudulently winning game 5s from the losers bracket by like playing Zillion like every game.
Okay. So who's the other choices? There's TSM
or this year's NRG. I think this year's NRG is a better team. NRG. Like they actually won kind of legitimately. Yeah, I would say that LCS was weaker this year than it was that year. But like that TSM team was really like the pinnacle of they can't keep getting away with it because they were just bad, but kept on clutching in these game 5s. It was absolutely ridiculous.
The problem is this. It depends what context you mean. Like, the problem is the TSM team, actually, if anything, were underperforming, like we're talking about, whereas actually the NRG team mega overperformed. Here's the problem.
Sure, that's fair.
I actually do think, even relative to their role, the players in TSM were way better. The difference is NRG, I actually think, played some real League of Legends. Like, I actually do think, by the way, this is where I'm able to keep all considerations in without getting too out crazy. Just because they won LCS, I don't suddenly think these players are all really good, mate. Like, I don't even know if any, like, okay, maybe Parler Fox's top 3 at his role. Aside from that, like, bro, I'd struggle. Are any of them top 3 at their role aside from that? Maybe FBI, you know what I mean? Like, even then we're talking tenuously. Like, they aren't top players. Like, if anything, what I give props to them is NRG is more like the classic American, like, 80s movie where, like, some fucking underdogs just get it together and they kind of have a cool vibe and they win anyway. Like, that's cool, but they're not actually top players. Like, spoiler, I think NRG is going to get fucking brutalized at Worlds, mate.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be really sad.
I think they'll win a game, though, but that's just because of Swiss, right?
I mean, if they can always play someone from like PCS or something, can't they? Get like a fluke game somewhere.
They won't
win game off an EU team. Could happen once, of course.
Yeah, they won't not win a game.
Like they could play BDS and win one game or something. Maybe, who knows?
I think the advantage of the Swiss system for NA is that it's going to be really hard to not win a game in Swiss, whereas it was a lot easier to be able to not win a game in groups, as it was.
Yes.
If you could take your favorite film series or trilogy and remove only one film, which one would it be?
A weird question, because I'm not one of these people, Monty, who gets that pissed by sequels. Like, I don't think I'm like that angle I've always told you, where famously someone said to Raymond Chandler, like, what do you think about them ruining all your books? And he was like, what do you mean? They're just there on the shelf. Like, what's the problem? Because they made all those movies. Like, I'm like that. I don't think making Star Wars now makes the old one suck somehow. So I'm trying to think, why would I remove a movie? Like, why am I just deleting a film for, like, what sort of spite is this to people who might well like that movie? What a weird question. So why am I removing one though?
I think it's just if you had to.
Series stronger or something. Is that the premise?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
I mean,
is there a really bad one? I'm trying to think.
If you only take the original Star Wars trilogy, surely you delete Return of the Jedi. But even then, it actually, in spite of the stupid Ewok shit, it actually does provide a very satisfying ending.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's one of the best archetypal endings ever, probably, right? Oh, I mean, the obvious one is I would remove the third X-Men film, X3, from X-Men and X2, because X-Men and X2.
Oh, that's true. That's a good one.
The third one was that shit one where, like, you know, where there was like, unironically, it did the Dragon Ball Z thing, like the power level. They were like checking each other's power levels and that. Do you remember when they were like, whatever is it? Magneto is a level 4 mutant. Like, what is this shit? Like, why are we doing the power reader from the beginning of Dragon Ball Z? Like, the fuck? That movie was trash, if you remember. It was just bad. It was just bad.
The question is that movie worse than X-Men Apocalypse? Because I think X-Men Apocalypse might be one of the worst superhero.
It's not a good one, certainly. Here's the difference, though. I mean, to be fair, they both have good actors, and they were just bad movies, both of them. Just bad movies.
I felt so bad for Michael Fassbender in X-Men Apocalypse, where he did that horrifically written scene where they like kill his family.
No, but
I was just laughing.
You say that, but like, On that same logic, though, I do feel way worse for the original cast. Remember, like Ian McKellen is like a real stage actor, guys, who does like Richard III and stuff. So the idea you're going to get these guys and put them in like bad kids fucking superhero comic book where they're dressed in all whack gear like that's so degrading for like a 90-year-old guy or something who's like some legend of screen and stage. Like, stage. It's just gross, isn't it? Like. If people don't know, by the way, just because it references last episode with Nicole LaPointe Jameson, do you know what people don't mention, Monty? So you know in that email they talked about how Sean Connery walked away at the top. Have you ever heard the story of why he did it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because
that fucking League of Gentlemen movie that Alan
that was terrible.
And because it was so shit, no joke, guys, he just basically decided, like, think I'm just done with Hollywood and just left. And just like, that was it. That was the end of his whole career.
The story was he was supposed to be Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, and he turned down the role because he didn't understand it. And so when he was offered, so first off, that part, Alan Quartermain is a super cool character. It's just League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. The movie was shit. The comic book with Alan Moore is excellent. It's really good. So it could have been a good movie, but because he didn't understand that part, he took it, and sadly, that was his last character that he ever played. Which
wasn't good.
If it had been done, if that had been done well, he could have been amazing in that movie.
Sure,
but the movie, the interpretation of Alan Moore was just so bad. I'm currently reading The Three Body Problem. I don't know how to pronounce the author's name. Qijin Liu. It was a Chinese science fiction book. Which has a really cool sci-fi premise. Yeah, I haven't read it yet. What I like most so far, though, is the beginning is set in the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The book motivated me to spend hours on the internet learning about Chinese history, which I never thought I'd care about. Was there any media you had a similar experience with that awakened an interest in a subject? I mean, sure, yeah.
As in, like, something that, like, sort of, you open it, you take that, and then suddenly you go down a whole rabbit hole into something else.
I started, reading the Iliad, and that got me hugely invested in Greek and Roman history, right? Which then I took classes in, I know it's Greek, but I took classes in Latin in college and learned a lot about Greek, archaeology and everything like that. So sure, I mean, that is massively, reading the Iliad massively informed my life. I read the Iliad when I was like 12, and it shaped my interests for the rest of my life.
I don't think I've got an answer for this. I don't think we have one.
Really?
Like, what movie would I have that then made me go into some topic?
Or a
like
book?
What?
No, like a book. There was a historical thing that you
did. Book necessarily.
All right.
Find
that surprising.
I guess the closest would probably be something like when I was actually quite young. I think I was only something like 19 or 20 when I read that book by Robert Anton Wilson, the one called the Illuminatus trilogy, where where the whole premise of it's a great premise for a sci-fi novel. The premise is every conspiracy ever is true all at the same time. So like simultaneously it is like the Masons doing this, but also like the Jesuits over here are doing something, but also like the Knights Templar were doing this, but also at the same time the Weather Underground is doing something, but at the same time there is a psychedelic plot. And so that's a great premise. But the reason why I pick that is because when I read this book, because I was quite young, I read it at face value, like, oh right, imagine if all these crazy conspiracies.
It's satire.
But the joke is now I could open that book at any page randomly doing like bibliomancy, Monty, and put my finger on a thing, and I probably am interested in whatever that conspiracy theory is now, but like 20 years later. That's why I say that's the closest I can come to as an answer on that one, because there actually are a lot of interesting rabbit holes on some of those that aren't as crazy as you think. By the way, as an aside, since he referenced it, actually look up what the three-body problem is, and you will be very shocked by how incredibly ropey all of astrophysics is, by the way. It'll blow your mind when you find out what the three-body problem actually is. It's insane. It's one of those, it's like that thing in science where they have like that replication crisis, and you found out like loads of the studies just were never even tried twice. Like there's certain things you can find out about like big mainstream science that are shocking when you find them out. Like it's on way more rickety fucking sort of ground than you think, mate. It's wild.
I've been meaning to read that book too.
Everyone thinks about that one. It is supposedly pretty good. I've had some legit people recommend that one.
There's also a movie or a TV series that's coming out that's based on it that I wanted to read the book before we start that. I think it comes out later this year. So I will read that book. I am very interested. Is there a market for a match of the day style highlights show for League of Legends, which intersplices clips with analysis, a way of reviving LCS numbers / interest by reducing commitment to watching all the games? No, that's not why people aren't watching LCS. People are watching LCS because they don't care. So like doing clips and analysis doesn't make them care. Like the problem is that the LCS was hugely boosted by popularity of players and personalities. So the way to do it is to simply get the players to be more of personalities again. And I say simply, but that is very difficult to do because many of these players are really fucking boring and demotivated at creating content.
Here's what's brilliant though. What you've just suggested there is a nutshell for why esports media has been shit forever. Because everyone's go-to is what you've just suggested. Everyone's go-to goes like this. Well, when I was they don't mention this, is all in parentheses. Well, when I was a boy, the most popular thing was ESPN Sports Center. So what if we made ESPN Sports Center for esports? Sounds like a great idea until you realize that has been the base root idea of every shit concept like G4, ESPN Esports, Yahoo. Go down the list. Like the premise goes that you're a boomer and it's 1980 and you just came in and you want to catch up on the game. That doesn't exist. That person who you think wants to watch that show does not exist. The joke is, even you aren't that person. Like you actually are the hardcore fan who wants to watch the game. So the real problem essentially is it always sounds like a good idea, but those shows have never been able to sort of like pull it off. Like they've never found the audience. And the worst ones, obviously, you know this, is the idea you could do that, but for all esports and do the magazine show. If people don't know, that is the most classic hack, like idea of death ever in esports media is let's do a sports center for all esports that you watch like for 1 hour. Like, again, it's a show with no audience, unfortunately. It sounds like it does, but it doesn't have any audience, I'm afraid.
Well, you also just have to consider the fact that we're talking very specifically about LCS now, which is, most hardcore fans of the esport who are interested in catching up on hardcore analysis or like analysis of the games and highlights are not LCS fans because LCS is bad. So you have to find a different hook to get people in. Do I think that there's a market for what you're talking about for people who want to quickly catch up on China, like LPL? Absolutely, I do. Because I think that if you're a hardcore fan, maybe you don't want to watch every single fucking LPL game because there's a billion of them, but you might be interested in that kind of content for LPL, which is like the easy to digest way, which is why, what Dom and K-Droll and LS do are great, which is that they edit down the streams that they do so you can watch kind of a quicker version of the matches. And to me, that makes sense. That's what I would say. Since all of us are anticipating the NFL show on the LFN Sports channel because we all know that will be a banger, what set of players are you two personally looking forward to seeing perform this season and how well they can do considering their team and schedule ahead of them for the season? In addition, how do you see those players in particular making the playoffs? Let's ignore that part. Are there players that you are anticipating seeing perform this season? I mean, Aaron Rodgers is the obvious one on the Jets, who are supposed to be very good.
Especially because they have a good defense.
Yeah, very good defense.
I've been waiting for a long time.
Very, good up-and-coming rookies and receivers. Now they have both Breece Hall and I'm forgetting Dalvin Cook. Thank you, Andrew, our producer, the Vikings running back. So it's very interesting to see how they're going to do with their young team with Aaron Rodgers. Like it does feel like Super Bowl or bust for these guys this year, and they're playing the Bills tonight. So that should be really exciting. I think that's probably the most interesting narrative that I'm thinking of this season. NFC's kind of boring. I guess the Niners with Brock Purdy's interesting considering he was the last pick of the draft and they've decided to go with him. And they have very interesting other players like Bosa and Debo and Christian McCaffrey.
And obviously.
Yeah, that's a really fun team to watch. Yeah, it's the first time I think I've ever been excited for the Jets, including when they went with the, including they've had some historically good players.
Oh, of course. Man, they used to have Darrell Revis. He was the fucking shit, wasn't he?
Yeah, Joe Namath. But I'm excited for the Jets, I would say. Also, the Cowboys' performance last night could be very interesting to see them as well. They didn't really, the defense won the game basically, but if they can continue to put up points on defense, that could be an exciting option. Also, the Jets' Hard Knocks has been fun to watch this season.
I mean, if people will know, I'm a massive Belichick fan. So, like, I will always watch the Patriots. I mean, they have fucking Ezekiel Elliott now, if people don't know, which is kind of a wild pickup out of nowhere. Like, that's interesting. See, because if people don't know, there's another reason why the Brady narrative is mad overrated. Bro, did you see how many of those latter-day Super Bowls, they were just on the back of the fucking running back? It was ridiculous. Like, there's that Sonny Michel guy had about like 4 touchdowns that offseason. Something made it ridiculous. Like, they were just running him in. So I actually think Bill Belichick could probably get a few more years out of him and just use him cynically in the right spots, you know? So it's quite an interesting team for me.
Dolphins this year should be fun too.
They certainly have an interesting ceiling.
Yeah,
they've got some pretty good fucking offensive
receivers.
players.
Yeah, the receivers are really fun to watch.
The real problem, I think, with the NFL is I think it's the worst sport I've ever seen, Monty, for people just taking the paycheck and going to like worthless teams. Like, if you look back now, when he retires, DeAndre Hopkins is going to have had such a stupid career. This guy, no joke, eye test might have been the best for 10 years. But what's he got from it? He's just gone to all these fucking mid-ass teams. It's like, and how many times has he gone to teams where it's like, bro, go with the really good quarterbacks, why'd you just go on with these like guys who are average as fuck? And then you make a godlike catch that makes them look sick. Why not just go to the best quarterback? You'd like win the fucking ring 10 times over. Like, people like him should have had so many rings, mate. It's mental. It's just gross, isn't it?
The crazy thing is the Titans might actually be the best team he's ever been on.
Even then, they're not stacked, are they? I know. And look at his quarterback again, like Tannehill. Like, give me a break.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the Titans, especially because they're in the AFC, are going to have a very hard time competing against some of the other quarterbacks.
Because you know, it's the sickest thing when you look in the history of the NFL, Monty. In the era of free agency, so we're mainly talking about the 90s and the 2000s, not like the eras like the old days where you just made a team and you stuck with the players. Dude, I'm not joking. It's the least satisfying. It's like, you know, in league, I always complain that the format of Worlds ruins the sport, because if you're on like the 5th best Chinese team, you're nobody, even though actually you might be on the 5th best team in the world. It's worse than that in the NFL. In the NFL, if you go look at the history of the last 30 years, Monty, most times the great quarterbacks are never linked with the great wide receivers, ever. That's why actually Brady having like Moss and fucking Gronk is actually like an outlier. All the rest are all like separated. Like, this is the talent you'd immediately put together. Like, I don't want to see some godlike fucking wide receiver just making some average quarterback look okay. I want to see him catch from the best quarterback and just tear the league up. It'd be amazing, wouldn't it? Just gross, isn't it?
Yeah. Will Fnatic be able to send their full summer roster to Worlds ever again? Or will some random event always afflict one of the players? It's crazy. It's crazy. Well, I hope Oscarinen is actually back for Worlds. It sounds like that might be on the table. So might get that one. You might get your wish. If you could adapt any book into a movie, what book would you choose and which director would you want for the film?
Oh, that's interesting because I'm picking the director too. Okay. By the way, technically, Monty, you can pick a book that was already there because it's the director. You could just put a better director on it. So that's not bad, actually. That's interesting. Okay, what would I pick?
So apparently Blood Meridian, which is one of my favorite books of all time by Cormac McCarthy, is in fact getting a film adaptation. I thought Ridley Scott did a very good job with The Counselor, which was the movie that Cormac, the screenplay that Cormac McCarthy wrote. I think that movie is just incredibly underrated. And so Ridley Scott doing Blood Meridian would probably be pretty rad, I think. John Hillcoat is supposed to direct the new Blood Meridian, apparently. So that's intriguing.
I've got an easy one for mine. Just because, as far as I know, it's never even come close to being made. I would just get a movie made of Hyperion.
Oh,
just
that's a
fucking
good one.
Banger book, innit? Like, and I also think the reason that would actually be a really good movie or TV series is because it's the ultimate fucking series. If you don't know, if you've never read it, no spoilers, it'd be the ultimate series to cast all the great character actors in, because essentially there's just a bunch of distinct characters. So like, this is the movie you would put in people like fucking classic, like, if they were alive, like Philip Seymour Hoffman or something, you know, you'd put these
Gary
people
Oldman.
in the roles. Yeah. If you actually put like legit people, and obviously for the director, again, you just need someone with a big, it could be Ridley Scott or someone, Christopher Nolan. You just need someone with a big vision, basically, because I feel like if you cast the right people, this could be amazing.
Very interesting in that too. Villeneuve, considering he's done a lot of sci-fi now. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the Dune movie that he did, but he did nail the aesthetic of Dune, I will say, and like the atmosphere I really enjoyed.
To me, what makes the book mega is that like every character in it is interesting in their own way. Like when you like in the first book, when you're learning the backstory of them all, they're all just really interesting. It's all totally different stories and different but like they're all mega. So I could see like I say, you could really go ham with the casting. Like you could have like fucking all the best actors, Anthony Hopkins, all the great actors could be in this movie.
That's a great one. I'd love to watch that. Plus, I mean, you could turn that into a trilogy, like really.
You've also got the option anytime you want to do a bunch more. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You wouldn't even like, you could turn just Hyperion itself, I think.
By the way, again, I won't give any spoilers, but if you were able to nail, I'll just say the aesthetic and graphics for the antagonist of this movie, it would be like all time great. Again, we won't give any details, but it would be amazing if you were able to nail the aesthetic.
Yeah, the Shrike would be really cool. Will we ever get Monty versus Reddit? We've had Thorin versus Reddit and Richard versus Reddit.
I'm amazed you've never done it, mate. Like, because here's the problem. You could even just do it like Richard does. Richard just sometimes, if he thinks the thread's out of control, pulls it up on his stream and just goes through it.
Yeah.
I'm amazed you've never done it ever on any of the ones that were like mad egregious about you.
I think the problem is like, I would just get super mad because the thing about Reddit and League of Legends is now they just lie about my career and things that happened. And like, these lies just get perpetuated. So my favorite one, Thorin, that goes around is that people claim that I was banned because I hid Chris Badawi being on the team. Like I couldn't have him be
wrong. Yeah.
I couldn't have him be the manager of the team. Even though if you actually look at the video I made, I literally show the forms with Chris Badawi's name as the manager of the team, and it was approved by Riot.
Yeah, basically the detail people get wrong is this. Because at the end, this is what they've scoffed. Because Riot claims, no evidence of this, by the way, that they have a source who overheard a conversation where Monty said he would like give control back to Chris Badawi. That was the issue. And then their claim was, if you remember, that anyone who has a future deal that you will have some sort of like ownership or control, it's effectively treated as if it exists now. Now, what they've done there, like you say, is they've scoffed it, and they're so dumb, they think that what actually happened was Chris Badawi was banned forever, but Monty thought he was sneaking him in by having him in the Renegades. And then the whole time, like, wait a minute, he was involved. No, like, as Renegade says, that was all approved. What he was allowed to do, he wasn't allowed to own it, but he was allowed to be the manager and run it, right? Essentially,
and,
right?
And also, even I mean, I can prove just via logic that the question of him being a future owner was also false. And the reason I can prove that is because we had the Renegades had the team in Europe as well that became Misfits that qualified. And so sure, we had conversations about what the ownership structure was going to look like in the future because he was supposed to be unbanned after a year. But there was never a concrete plan to have him have ownership of the LCS team because we had talked about futures such as if the team in Europe qualifies for the LEC, we might actually just completely split and one of us take each of the teams. So there were so many factors that we didn't know. What was going to happen. So we couldn't have actually made any plans. And by the way, here's the other factor is that I released my attorney from attorney-client privilege to discuss this with Riot and also publicly. And if there was an agreement about who was going to own the team, why would we not have had the lawyer that we used draft that agreement? But that agreement was never drafted. So like my attorney will literally say that I said, I don't want attorney-client privilege. You can talk about this. He himself said there was no agreement. So like if there's no legal agreement, and also there couldn't have been a legal agreement because of the situation that existed, the whole thing was just complete bunk.
By the way,
it was invented.
Another thing I would throw on that is one thing I fucking despise is when people decide someone's bad or they've done something wrong, they retcon history that everything ever that was claimed that they did was all wrong and everyone knew it. So one thing they try to do with you is they act like, and of course Monty should never have had the guy there anyway because he was guilty of all that stuff where he was poaching people. You fucking clowns. On the one hand, you're going to take Richard Lewis's reporting later in the story and use it against Monty, but then you're going to ignore where Richard Lewis himself showed said, and this is why he was friends with Badawi, that story was total bunk and that a bunch of the owners made it up and that Travis participated in essentially railroading someone. And, and the most crazy part about that detail that I do know myself is the very people who claimed, owners who claimed Chris Badawi poached, I know for a fact have poached repeatedly, almost as an MO, their entire 10 years in LCS. So the whole thing was so egregious, the idea that, like, you should have known better. It's like, mate, what he did wasn't even as bad, and they were all doing that at that time. So just because you don't like the guy now, understandably, for things he did later, you don't retcon all the history before that, boys. You don't do that. That's nonsense. Come on.
The kid that owned Gravity literally admitted to lying about everything that he said about Badawi, and that none of it actually happened about the poaching stuff. And so, Badawi was basically falsely accused by a bunch of the team owners because they considered him a threat. Some of the things they said were just so absurd. Like, one of them was like he tried to poach Dan Din from TSM, who is Reginald's brother. Like, how is that even possible? Like, why would he do that? It doesn't make any logical sense. Anyway, I do find it frustrating, but at this point in time, the lies just keep circulating.
I agree with that as well. It's one thing. Here's the thing, Monty. I'll do like a video where I make fun of stupid opinions. You're right. If they just overtly lie about you, I mean, there's nothing you can do aside from say it's not true, is there? Like, you're almost wasting your time giving them a platform at that point, aren't you?
Well, the other thing is, like, how can I prove it's not true when I already showed the paperwork, the physical evidence that shows that is not true, and people don't believe it? You know what I mean? Like, I presented that evidence already in the form of approved paperwork from Riot. So what can you do? You have grown quite a large community, and I know Thorin loves Quake. Have you considered creating an LFN Quake Cup similar to the old Defiler StarCraft Brood War Cups, very small cups, which rewards like $100, but would gather quite a few recurring players? I mean, it'd be fun, but that's something for the future, I think. It's hard that's a lot of work, guys, to manage those tournaments.
Here's the thing. I've always said, I'm elitist. I don't give a flying fuck about the grassroots. I don't care. So if we were ever going to do something, it's not impossible one day we'll do a tournament. The difference is, Monty, if we ever do a tournament, we'll go at the top end. Like, my dream would be that if something like Counter-Strike is still open circuit, we do our version of Gamers 8. Like, we have a one-off tournament with a bunch of money on a week, and it only needs a week, and you get a bunch of top teams, and then we do our style of production. That would be the way we'd do tournaments. We're not going to do some like community cup. I just don't care about that. I don't give a flying fuck, mate.
It's also just a lot of effort.
Which historic efforts just to run it, the admins. It's way more than you realize, guys. It's an arsehole, I'm telling you.
Which historic esports rivalries have pushed both players or teams to improve the most in an attempt to best the other?
I mean, obvious one's Flash and Jaedong. I actually do think that scenario is a bit like what happened with like Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic. Like, essentially, people always do that angle, Monty, of like, but if one of them didn't exist, they'd all have twice as many. I actually don't think that's true. I think if you actually existed on your own and you were just some god uber, like way out of everyone else's league, I actually think you might win less. You sort of might you might do what G2 did now. You might fuck around every now and then. You might lose one here and there, I actually think the really great rivalries do exactly what he said there. I think people like Flash and Jaedong, knowing that, like, I don't even have to just be the best. I might have to be the best player ever to win this next tournament. I think that's only good. I think it just pushes both people to the top level. It just makes you go to the absolute peak, Essentially, it's like my favorite film, The Prestige. You just keep pushing off each other the whole time. And I think every great rivalry seems like that in sports, in esports. So there's one. Is there a good one you think for League or Warcraft 3 or something?
I mean, I think
or whatever.
Moon and Grubby's a very good
classic one, right? Weren't they at one point in time also like going for like it's something like who would won the most golds at World Cyber Games or something like that, and they both won 2 or something? I forget that story, something like that, right?
Also, the matchup between Orc and Night Elf really evolved as a result of that rivalry, and like Moon developing the what is it? I can't remember the name of the unit right now. The Druids of the Talon strategies with the Cyclones against Orc, and it's a very interesting rivalry over the years. I would say, interestingly, the Rocks Tigers T1 really pushed both teams to be better, because considering they were really their only opponents, like the only real teams during a lot of the Korean exodus after all of the Samsung players left and a bunch of other players left too, I think they really pushed each other to achieve new heights, and it did end up, I think, allowing T1 to remain sharp enough to continue to win worlds when a lot of those Chinese teams were rising.
I mean, if you want to do an EU one, because it's on point with the current topical one, I actually do think, as much as I think they get overrated how good they were, it is necessary in Season 9 and Season 10 that you have Fnatic. Like, again, if G2 was just that much ahead of everyone, they probably wouldn't be as good. Like, what kept them sharp is they knew every finals, Fnatic's going to be there, and they're actually going to be good. We have to actually sort of play real League of Legends to win. So I thought that was a pretty cool rivalry, even though sadly Fnatic never got anything out of it themselves, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. If Heroic wasn't such an easy reference, would you have a different team? Would you have a different team to liken ENCE to, or would you grant them more time to overcome their finals nerves? In other words,
I'll explain this to you. Basically, the problem he has is this. At the moment, the ENCE teams made all these finals,
right?
But
and they keep losing.
I mean, they did a while ago. They won the IM Dallas, but they haven't won the big ones, right? And basically, Heroic did something similar. They got to the top and they were super consistent, but they kept losing in the finals. So essentially, that is the like analog we all use. But what's the end of the question? Like,
are you unfairly comparing ENCE to Heroic, particularly in the timescale metric?
I don't think so.
Okay, that's fair.
Basically, the premise goes like this. The only way it's unfair is that they're both orgs that aren't spending massive megabucks. So it is sort of like both of these teams have already insanely overperformed, getting to like close to world number one or being in a big final over and over again. So in that sense, they shouldn't win everything. The problem is the way they play the game is so good that they could have won all these tournaments. Essentially, that's the killer. So the reason why we compare them also is because they come from like essentially low-income backgrounds where you're not supposed to. These aren't the Yankees and the fucking Barcelonas of CSGO, but somehow they're in position to win those titles. So I think that's why everyone does the comparison as closely. And also, because for similar reasons, because they're not the big... But these aren't the best players in the world in general. These are more like, you know, it's like the way the team's put together is really good. Or you found a player, like the Sun Pius guy for ENCE right now, right? He isn't close to the best AWPer in the world, but it turns out he's a really good, like, big game player, and they needed, like, a star player. So it's like, how will they fit into their teams is what makes them compelling as well. Like, these are squads where it really is the five-man lineup. It's not like individual players would be in all-star teams elsewhere. So I think it's a pretty fair comparison, personally. I think it's a pretty good one.
All right, we're going to do one more question because I actually have to get out of this room that I'm renting right now. Okay. I only have it for half a day, and we've also done over 3.5 hours at this point in time. Have T1 fans surpassed Fnatic and TSM fans for the most annoying fan base? If not, how close is it?
By the way, you probably win by default just from doing some real life action, like threatening people's lives, sending trucks. Like, as bad as TSM fans are, what's the worst they ever did? Just basically go on Reddit, Twitter, or shout TSM at an inappropriate moment in the game. Like, that's not really that bad, is it? Like,
I will say this.
The idea people were saying they were going to stab Faker or something, that seems pretty beyond the fucking pale.
I have gotten more death threats from Fnatic fans than TSM fans. So shout out to you Europeans, more likely to try and death threat me over the years. T1 fans are very annoying right now because of the expectations that they have for this team. And also, as we've discussed many times, the fact that T1 themselves has tried to turn those players into K-pop stars. And so it has invited some really aggressive, shitty fans to like protect the idols. And that's very annoying. And also made them like really whiny and demanding because they don't just tell their fans to stop fucking doing things. Same thing with Fnatic, by the way. They don't put their foot down and say, like, it's not appropriate for you guys to interact with the team or interact with players like this.
The worst of all, Monty, because they directly interact with those nutter ultras. They still do it to this day, by the way. Sam Matthews still goes in with that fucking guy who runs that Discord. Like, that's crazy to me. Because you're all, like, at that point in time, what I would genuinely ask someone like that, Monty, is you are aware that if there was a nutter stalker who's going to kill your player, you might be talking to him right now. You're actually enabling / encouraging that sort of fandom, which I think is just bonkers. Because my whole shit would be this. Like, I'm like Richard. I'm fine even, by the way, with you going to you can boo the other team if you want. You can be obnoxious. You can have a sign. But don't ever cross the line of doing things like try and touch the players, tell someone you're going to follow them. If you do any weird behavior, I do think you should be like explicitly said, that, like you said, that this isn't what we want for our fan base. We don't want people to do that, you know. I think you should go out your way to say that if you're these orgs, especially when nothing's happened yet, because as soon as someone gets attacked or something, it's going to get really sad, this whole story. Then it won't just be like with Duncan on loser fans. Like, eventually something like that is going to happen because of how lax the security is and how close the proximity. And you can just go outside some of these bloody events and meet the players. Like, I think that's a recipe for disaster with how the ultra sort of K-pop stan culture we're building up at the moment. It's like, it's bubbling right below the surface for me.
Yeah, so I'm not a fan. It actually makes me really disappointed because T1 fans didn't used to be like this. Like this was
No,
not the
no.
MO. We have 25 years of basically almost 25 years of this team being in existence right now, and for the vast majority of their history, the fans have been really great. And as somebody who has historically really loved the T1/SKT organization for their longevity, and there's no doubt that they are the most prestigious, accomplished organization in the history of esports. It is depressing for me to see the fans behaving this way because I want to like T1. I do, but they make it so easy to dislike them, basically. So yeah, that's pretty big bummer. But I do think that they have the worst fan base right now. Partially because they have the biggest expectations. Nobody really has the huge expectations for Fnatic and TSM. Fnatic fans were at their worst in 2015 when people thought they could actually win worlds, and TSM fans were, they've been stripped of their delusion and are mostly very sad now, and will soon go away because TSM allegedly is leaving LCS. Thank God. So I think they're pretty mild in comparison to T1 right now. All right, guys. We did have quite a few questions this week. There are more. Please retype your questions in if you would like them to be answered in future episodes. We did over an hour of questions, so I just have to go because I'm renting this room, and also the show is very, very long already. We will see you guys not next week, it turns out. We will see you guys for our Worlds preview episode. Probably will not be able to take questions on that one because those shows are like 5 hours long with guests typically. So we may have to hold questions until we get into Worlds itself. But we'll be back for our Worlds preview episode, and we'll see you then.